Welcome, everyone, this is your friend, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of, what if mute Angel Barton gathered courage to confess feelings? A special shout out to the original creator, the Ice Goddess. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic, writing. Signing. Got it? Good, on with the show, for the third freaking time. And thank you for flying with us, the stewardess chirped over the intercom and I snorted in amusement. As if I wasn't the only passenger currently on this plane. As soon as I was free to move about the cabin, I began trying to work the kinks and stiffness out of my back and neck. I knew I shouldn't have fallen asleep during the flight, no matter how comfortable the seats of the Stark Industries jet were. Rolling my shoulders one last time, I grabbed my carry-on and began making my way to the front of the plane to get off, after being assured that the stewards would take care of my other luggage. Finally exiting the plane, I blinked at the sudden onslaught of sunlight. Angel! Over here! I squinted against the light and made out the forms of Clint and Natasha waiting for me off to the side of the runway next to a plain black SUV. I grinned as I hoisted my bag higher up on my shoulder and made my way over to them. As soon as I was within reach, Clint dragged me into a hug, spinning me around as he did so, making me laugh. Natasha rolled her eyes fondly at our antics. I want to turn too, Clint. Share, she grumbled and wrestled me out of Clint's grip to give me her own fierce hug. Geez, it's like you two haven't seen me in years, it's only been a month. I signed teasingly, my hands flowing over the words with a smooth familiarity. Well, it always feels like longer when you're away from family. Whatever you say, Clint. Speaking of family, Laura says that if I get hurt she will drag the whole family up here to kick your ass. Fair warning. I smirked as I watched Clint visibly pale at my message. I knew that, while Natasha was his assassin soulmate, Laura had always been the one that made him shake in his boots. It probably had something to do with the fact that even Natasha let Laura mother and boss her around, so Laura was basically the head of their triad. Clint liked to think he was, being the only male in the grouping, but everyone that met the three of them knew better. Of course you'll be taken care of, I mean, look at this, Clint gestured wildly as the jet behind us. Stark let you fly on his private jet. How many people can say they've done that? How can Laura doubt my parenting skills? I giggled as Clint ranted. I could give you plenty of good reasons as to why she should doubt your parenting skills. I'm only insulted that she doesn't think I can get her out of the trouble you will inevitably get her into. Natasha deadpanned and I giggled again as Clint began a big, exaggerated show of offense. As much as I love hearing about these so-called parenting skills, I'm kind of tired. I guess I didn't get enough sleep on the jet. Could we maybe get going before I fall asleep standing up? Of course. Let's get you home and I'll tuck you in like any good father would. I tried to hide a cringe. Knowing Clint, he would probably follow through with that, if just to tell Laura that he had, in fact, acted like a father. I really don't need to be tucked in, Clint. I'm 23 years old. I think I can manage. I signed firmly, determined to nip his train of thoughts in the bud before he offered to read me a bedtime story and get me a warm glass of milk as well. But I want to prove to your mother that I can be a good parent, he whined. How about you prove it by not smothering your adult daughter and getting her to a nice, warm bed? That sounds like good parenting to me. Don't you agree, Tasha? The redhead smirked at my obvious plea for backup before shrugging. Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I never read those parenting books that Laura threw at us, but the idea does seem to have its merits. Natasha winked at me as my shoulders sagged in relief. Clint seemed to brighten at the thought of being considered a good parent and began dragging me towards the SUV, where the flight attendants had already placed the rest of my suitcases. I slid into the backseat and relaxed against the cool leather upholstery, letting loose a huge yawn that cracked my jaw and made my eyes water. Clint chuckled. I guess you weren't kidding. That was a pretty big yawn. Do we need to get you to a hospital to make sure you didn't break your jaw? Too tired to banter back and forth with him anymore. I settled for maturely sticking out my tongue at him, ignoring his snickers. Natasha got into the car as well and Clint began driving out of the airport, immediately getting trapped in the New York traffic. As he and Natasha began bickering back and forth over which way would get them to the Avengers Tower the fastest, my mind began to wander. It had been 8 years since Clint, Laura, and Natasha had adopted me into their little family. 8 years of absolute chaos, but I loved them for it anyway. It had been hard trying to find anyone that would take in a 15-year-old mute girl, but the three of them had been my angels the day they had adopted me. Before that, I had been in foster care for as long as I could remember, having been dropped off when I was younger after my abusive mother had decided that she couldn't handle being the single mother to a useless little mute brat. I had no idea who my dad was, but I honestly didn't care anymore. I had Clint for that, though I never called him dad. I never called Natasha or Laura mom either. It was mostly because I had bad memories of moms, but also because she was confused as to who to call mom anyway. Natasha? Laura? Both. But then, how would they know which mom I was referring to when she signed for one of them? Despite the fact that I had never called them by their titles, I thought of them as family, and I knew I was lucky to have been taken in by such wonderful people. At 23 years old, fresh out of college, I was just beginning to get out on my own, having a little apartment in the town closest to the family ranch house and working at the local animal shelter. It wasn't like the hustle and bustle of Natasha and Clint's life, but I was content with it. But while I was content, I wasn't completely happy. I wanted to get out while I was still young, see some of the world and all its treasures. That desire was what had led me to accept Clint's enthusiastic proposal of a vacation in the Big Apple with him and Natasha. With free room and board, courtesy of her family's Avengers teammate Tony Stark, I definitely could have done worse for my first big trip out into the world. Who knew? Perhaps I would even meet my soulmates. As I rubbed my sides fondly where my soul marks were, the SUV finally pulled up to the tower, its sheer enormity making me gape in awe. Clint, by now apparently immune to the majesty of the tower, pulled into Stark's private garage and parked. "All right, here we are," Clint said cheerfully before getting out and gathering up my things from the trunk. I got out of the car with Natasha, careful not to touch any of the vintage cars that surrounded us, for fear of scratching one of them accidentally. Clint walked towards me, my suitcases rolling behind him. I already asked Stark to upload a program into Jarvis so that his cameras will pick up anything you sign to him, so he'll be able to understand you and help you out around the tower. Jarvis, say hello to Natasha and I's daughter, Angel. Good morning, Ms. Barton. It's a pleasure to meet you. A disembodied voice echoed around us and I smiled happily up at the ceiling. Natasha had already warned me about Jarvis and how he being everywhere might take some getting used to. I had told her that it couldn't be any worse than growing up with two master spies that somehow always knew what I was doing, even thousands of miles, and sometimes even continents, away. It's nice to meet you as well, Jarvis. If I need to sign slower for you to understand me, I can do that to help as well. I signed towards a camera I had spotted situated in the corner of the garage's ceiling. I signed somewhat slower than my usual quick, casual speed, but fast enough that it might have given a normal person stewage difficulty. My cameras are able to pick up any speed of your signing and even some of your own personal nuances to certain signs. However, if there comes a time that I miss one of your signals, I will not hesitate to ask for you to repeat it so that I may learn to understand you better in the future. The AI assured me. I huffed out a laugh in amazement. Stark had really outdone himself with his AI. Don't worry about Jarvis. Clint and I have been testing him since Stark downloaded the program, so we could see how well he really knew sign language. So far he has done perfectly. You'll be fine with him. Natasha signed to me, casually switching from speaking to signing flawlessly. I appreciate your faith in me, Mrs. Romanoff. Jarvis replied easily. I was inwardly glad that Natasha had decided to keep her name when she had bonded with Clint and Laura. She hadn't needed to, but she had decided to keep her name and let Laura take Clint's name. Simply changing her title to Mrs. It might have been a bit too confusing for me to distinguish between Mrs. and Ms. Barton. I raised my hands, about to respond, when another yawn overtook me. I covered my mouth, blushing. Okay, enough chit-chat. You can meet everyone later, after you nap, Clint teased, gently nudging me with one of my suitcases. You make it sound like I'm a 5-year-old. I'm a grown-ass woman, Clint. I complained good-naturedly as we made our way to the elevator and up to my designated home for the next couple of months. And I'm a grown-ass man. That doesn't mean that naps aren't something I look forward to. You sure that's not because you're less of a grown-ass man and more of an old-ass man? Natasha and I laughed as Clint dropped my suitcases and sputtered indignantly. After making our way up to my new abode, a comfy, modernly designed suite, I quickly bid them goodbye. I found the bedroom, kicked off my shoes, and immediately fell into bed, sleep quickly overtaking me. "Miss Barton?" I groaned into the pillow, silently pleading for just 5 more minutes under the luxurious warmth of the covers. "I apologize, Miss Barton, but your breathing rate indicates that you are awake and your father wishes for me to inform you that your presence has been requested for dinner," Jarvis continued, keeping me from falling back into my peaceful slumber. I groaned, wrenching myself up from the bed. Of course Clint wouldn't let her have a few hours of, "Wait, did he say dinner?" I signed my question up to the AI, who replied that, yes, it was around 6:15 and dinner would be served around 6:30. I looked down at my wrinkled clothes and touched my hair, feeling the knots in it, a sure sign of a good sleep. I mentally cursed my luck. I had 15 minutes to become presentable and to make sure I made a good impression of my family's teammates. Lovely. I dove into the bags I had yet to unpack and grabbed a fresh blouse and my brush. Quickly divesting myself of my old, wrinkled t-shirt, I pulled on the new shirt and yanked the brush through my long, auburn curls. It was times like these that I really wished that I had shorter hair. I hurried into the adjoining master bath and stopped short to gaze at the amazing bathroom. Damn, I definitely could have done worse for my first trip. There was a walk-in shower in one corner and a huge, jetted tub that could probably fit 3 of me in the other. One wall was completely dominated by a mirror and a marble countertop with a beautiful silver sink. Now, I wasn't too much of a girly girl, but this bathroom made me want to squeal in happiness and spend hours taking a nice, hot bubble bath and pampering myself like there was no tomorrow. Too bad I didn't have time for that. With one last longing gaze towards the tub and shower, I stepped in front of the mirror and continued to comb through the rat's nest I called my hair. How could my hair have become so tangled after just a few hours of sleep? I finally finished my hair, wrangling it to the best of my abilities, and looked myself over with a critical eye. Hazel eyes that were more green than brown stared back at me in the glass, filling up my pale face. A few unwanted freckles dotted my nose and my lips were a pretty pink. I decided to forego makeup for the first meeting and hope for the best, racing back into the bedroom to check the clock on the night table next to the bed. 6:24. I could still make it on time, no thanks to Clint. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to wear shoes or not. Was this a formal meet and greet or a more informal family meal? I could have asked Jarvis, but I just grabbed some flats and shoved my feet into them. If I didn't have to wear shoes, I could easily slip them off. I quickly made my way over to the elevator, determined to make it on time to the dining room, wherever that was. Speaking of which, where was I even going? Jarvis? Where exactly am I supposed to meet everyone? I signed sheepishly, pausing right before I pressed any of the elevator buttons. It seemed silly that I needed to ask the AI for directions in the building I would be calling home, but the place was huge, and it wasn't like I had received a map upon entering the skyscraper. The common area is located on the floor button where the giant resides, Ms. Barton. The AI replied, and I swore I could hear some amusement in his electronic voice. I was confused at his answer though, and actually looked closer at the buttons this time. For the first dozen floors there were just normal numbers on each of the buttons, but as I looked to the upper floors, symbols replaced the numbers. What's with the pictures? I signed to Jarvis curiously. Sir decided that it was too hard to remember where all the Avengers lived, so each of their apartments has a symbol that represents them. Your button is the one with the lips sewn together. I apologize for Sir's sense of humor. Unfortunately, you will probably be dealing with more of it in the future. I could practically hear the AI rolling his virtual eyes at Stark's brand of humor. I personally found it kind of funny. I certainly wouldn't forget which floor was mine. I took a moment to review all of the floor symbols. The top floor had a green arc reactor printed on it, which I assumed was the shared apartment of Tony and his soulmate, Bruce Banner. The floor below had the A Jarvis had mentioned printed on it in a bold, silver font. The floors below belonged to the rest of the Avengers. A frozen, pure silver shield represented Steve Rogers and his soulmate, Bucky Barnes, sweet. A web with an arrow stuck in it was Natasha and Clint's home. The lightning bolt in front of a rainbow had to be the apartment of Thor and his mate, Jane Foster, but the others I was confused about. Jarvis? Who lives in the pictures under Thor's and the ones under mine? The room directly below Mr. Odinson's that is represented with a taser belongs to Ms. Lewis, Ms. Foster's assistant. The button with the wings represents the abode of Mr. Wilson, aka the Falcon. The floor right above yours with the pepper shaker belongs to Ms. Potts. The two rooms below your with stick figures are the extra guest rooms. Your room was once one of these guest rooms. The floors below the guest rooms with the Iron Man helmet, a DNA molecule, and the Milky Way are Sir's, Dr. Banner's, and Ms. Foster's personal labs, respectively. The next button, the one with the weights, represents the gym. The button below with a sandwich is the cafeteria, though most of the Avengers choose to either eat in their rooms or in the commons area. All buttons with numbers are workplaces for Stark Industries employees. Save for the cafeteria, only those with Avengers level access or explicit permission are allowed onto the symboled floors. You have already been given access to all of these floors due to your connection with Mr. Barton and Mrs. Romanoff. Wow. Okay then. Information overload. Realizing that I had been wasting time talking, and about elevator buttons no less, I pressed the button labeled A and leaned against the sleek silver walls as the elevator began climbing the floors. As the elevator ascended, I began to worry. What if they didn't like me? What if I made a bad first impression? What if I made a fool of myself in front of the world's greatest heroes? I'd never lived that down. I was about to have an anxiety meltdown when the elevator issued a soft ping, and the doors slid open soundlessly. I took a deep breath and entered the room. To find only Clint waiting for me. Where's everyone? I thought Jarvis said dinner was at 6:30? It is. Clint signed back, smirking. What I forgot to have Jarvis mention was that nobody actually shows up on time, and we all decided to order pizza. A nice, relaxed first meeting for you. It's not my fault that you thought you had to show up on time. I glared at him, eyes narrowed. You knew I would want to be here on time to make a good first impression, Clint. Why would you do that to me? I was panicking, you jackass. I gestured angrily, my signing becoming harsher with my irritation. Clint merely shrugged and looked at his fingernails, reminding me too much of a teenage girl. Not my fault you thought you had to make a good first impression. I told you that we Avengers are like a family. This is my way of telling you to calm down. I knew you'd be panicked. Relax, Angel. He shrugged, as if almost giving me a heart attack was no big deal. Now, some might think me stupid for tackling a master assassin, but this was Clint. He knew to let me attack, as I was about as much a threat to him as a kitten was to an elephant. He laughed as he allowed me to launch myself at him so that they both fell onto the couch. I tried valiantly to strangle him for a minute before he retaliated with his superior tickling skills. He had always known my weak spots. I silently squealed with laughter, tears running down my cheeks, and gave the sign for defeat. He relented, but not before causing me to fall off the couch in my giggles. Well, that was informational. Bruce Makels can, in fact, laugh. A voice above me spoke and I looked up to see a smirking Tony Stark next to an amused Bruce Banner. Great. I scrambled up and tried to right my ruffled clothing. I raised my hands to sign, but then I remembered that this wasn't Clint or Natasha and they probably wouldn't understand American Sign Language. I settled for giving the two of them a weak smile and a wave. I just wanted to curl up and die of embarrassment. Bruce chuckled quietly before he began signing, shocking me. It's all right. I can understand ASL if you need a translator, or you could ask Jarvis, or you could just use a pad of paper and a pencil. Whatever you feel the most comfortable with. And don't mind Tony, I'll rein him in if his jokes get too tasteless. My mouth hung open for a few seconds before a big grin spread across my face and I started signing back to him excitedly. It's so nice to have someone other than Clint and Natasha to sign with. I'd prefer a pad of paper and a pencil if that's alright with you. I just feel like that would be less awkward and I wouldn't have to rely on you or Jarvis to answer everything for me. I wouldn't want to inconvenience you. Bruce smiled gently and was about to respond when Tony made himself known again. Okay, if you're going to have a special no-talking club, then why wasn't I invited? I bring the fun. As Minnie Katniss has an excuse as to why she's not answering me, that leaves it up to you, Brookie. What is being said? Bruce rolled his eyes and shook his head fondly at his soulmate's shenanigans. I spoke up before he could respond. I can answer, you just won't understand me. It must suck to be a genius and not know something that the other three people in the room do. I signed and Bruce and Clint laughed. Tony looked between the three of us, confused. What did she say? I just grinned as the other two men shook their heads, refusing to translate. Fine. I'll just have to learn sign language then. Tony pouted as he made his way towards what I assumed was the kitchen. Bruce shook his head again and turned back to me, holding out his hand for me to shake. As I'm sure you know, I'm Bruce Banner and that was Tony Stark. It's nice to meet you, Angel. Clint has told us a lot about you. I'm sure you'll love it herein. Oh, sure, now you talk in a language I can understand, Tony shouted from the other room, making me giggle. Maybe I should get that paper and pencil before Tony gets really upset. Bruce nodded and looked up towards the ceiling. Jarvis, could we get a pad of paper and pencil or pen in here, please? Of course, Dr. Banner. There is a pad of paper in the drawer of the cabinet to your left and Sir has pencils and pens lying around in various places. I'm sure he will be able to tell you where one is located. I refuse, Tony shouted again as Bruce rifled through the aforementioned drawer, coming back with a pad of notebook paper. Tony, get Angel a pencil or no alcohol for you during supper. Joke's on you, I already have my scotch, Tony said as he sauntered back into the room, holding a pencil and a glass of amber liquid. Now, since I am such a generous, caring person, I will forgive Angel and give her this pencil. And it has nothing to do with the fact that, without it, I can't understand her. He smirked as he handed it over, ruffling my hair as he walked past, like I was a little kid. I wrinkled my nose and straightened my hair. I hadn't brushed it just for Tony to ruin it again. I signed thank you to Bruce as he handed me the paper. He smiled and waved off my thanks. It was no problem. Before any of us could begin talking again, we all heard footsteps from outside the hall. Angel? Your girl's name is Angel? I heard a deep, rough voice echo down the hall before the owner of the voice appeared with Natasha and another man. Natasha rolled her eyes. Yes, her name is Angel. She turned towards me. Angel, meet Sergeant Bucky Barnes and Captain Steve Rogers. The men standing next to Natasha were huge. I knew that they were super soldiers, but damn. The man closest to Natasha, Bucky, was the bulkier of the two. His dark brown hair hung around his face in a tousled way that suggested that he had just rolled out of bed. His face was chiseled to perfection with gunmetal-colored eyes that sparkled with humor and mischief. His lips were just begging to be kissed, and were currently pulled up into a slight smirk. I barely even noticed the bright silver of his metal arm. All I could focus on were his features before my eyes were caught by the other superhuman beauty in the room. Steve was slightly slimmer than Bucky. Leaner where Bucky was pure muscle mass, but was just as tall. His blonde hair was cut without a hair out of line and gave him a sweet, innocent look somehow. His earnest, baby blue eyes seemed to stare straight into my soul with a gentleness that just made me want to melt. While he was just as chiseled as his mate, he had more of a classical beauty than the sultry, sexy look Bucky was sporting. Steve was like an all-American Adonis. Both faces were perfect, yet held so many emotions and so much history. These two men had been through hell and back, but were still going strong. They weren't just soldiers, they were fighters. Bucky's stormy gray eyes suddenly locked with mine and I felt my heart skip a beat. The world seemed to slow as he said his first words to me, words that had been printed on my left hip since the day I was born. Well, damn. I've always wanted to meet an angel. I gasped as his words hit me like a brick. No, it couldn't be. It had to be a fluke. Bucky was the soulmate of Steve. There was no information suggesting that the two of them were a part of a triad. I waited with bated breath to hear what Steve would say to me, both praying and dreading that his words would be a perfect match to the statement on the right side of her hips. Be polite, you jerk, Steve chastised Bucky easily, bumping his shoulder playfully with his own before turning to me. This was it. This would prove that they were not my soulmates. Steve definitely wouldn't say. Don't mind him, he's just being himself. Oh, my God. No, absolutely not. Not my baby girl. No, Clint broke the awkward silence that had descended after Steve's words. I was still in a state of shock, frozen in place, staring at the two super soldiers. Bucky and Steve just looked at each other, adorably confused. What's going on? They both asked simultaneously. Natasha sighed in aggravation and grabbed both Clint and I and began dragging us into the kitchen while Bucky, Steve, Bruce, and Tony watched on in varying states of confusion and amusement. "Excuses for just a minute. Family meeting," Natasha said briskly as she pulled us into the other room. She turned to me and asked me the fateful question in sign language, presumably so the others wouldn't be able to eavesdrop on our conversation. "Those are your words, aren't they, Angel?" I nodded, still trying to get over my shock. No, 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 I am not allowing my baby girl to be swept away by Mr. Apple Pie and a Russian assassin super soldier." Clint's entire body was tensed and in protector mode, his eyes constantly sweeping our surroundings as if there was a threat that he needed to take out. As he and Natasha continued to sign back and forth, my mind was working overtime, trying to process everything. Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, the famous super soldiers and men out of time, had just said the words that had been tattooed on my hips since I was born. Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes were my soulmates, the ones who were destined to complete me on every level. We were soulmates. I could have squealed with delight. I had finally found my soulmates, and they were Steve and Bucky. Just as soon as the excitements crept up on me, the doubt slipped in and doused me with reality. I surely wasn't good enough for them. I was just a normal mute girl. How could I measure up to two of the world's greatest heroes? Besides, they were happy without me. That fact sucked the rest of my joy out of me. They didn't need me. Me being mute, they wouldn't have a mark to suggest that they had another soulmate. They had grown up knowing they were meant for each other, and that was that. They didn't need someone like me butting in and ruining their perfect relationship. They both had been through so much in their lifetimes, and now the universe just wanted to throw in another wrench to make their lives more difficult. Me. All I would be to them would be an inconvenience. Just another weight on their shoulders. I couldn't do that to them. Wouldn't do that to them. They deserved so much more than whatever measly offering I could give them. "Angel, what's wrong, baby girl?" Clint snapped me out of my thoughts, and I found myself the focus of two concerned assassins. It wasn't until then that I realized that tears had welled up in my eyes. I quickly wiped them away and put on a brave face, reluctant determination thrumming inside me. I could do this. For my soulmates. I'm not going to tell them. What? They both signed to me, eyes wide. I'm not going to tell them. It will just cause problems. How on earth do you figure that? Angel, you're their soulmate. You are as far from a problem as you can get. Look, if this is about how I responded to it as first, I'm sorry. I was just shocked, but I'm happy for you. Clint signed quickly. I shook my head. No, no, it's not that. They don't know that they have another soulmate because they don't have my words. They're happy with their relationship, and I'm not going to ruin that for them. As far as they know, they're a part of a pair. A completed pair, not a triad. They don't need the added burden of a surprise soulmate thrown into their lives. Both of them frowned at me. You are anything but a burden, Angel. And I'm sure they would agree. Now, you're going to walk in there and tell them that you are their third soulmate, Natasha signed, giving me a frim look that dared me to argue with her. I glared back. It's my choice, Natasha. You have no say in this. If I choose not to tell them, then you are going to respect my decision and keep it to yourself. I turned my glare over to Clint. That includes you as well. Clint shared a worried look with Tasha. Angel, if you're part of a triad, that means you need all of its members to be complete. So, even if Bucky and Steve seem perfect on the outside, they have to have some issues behind closed doors if fate decreed that they need you to balance them out. And, now that I really think about it, you really are kind of perfect for them. You need to give this a chance, Angel. I shook my head. I'll be their friend. Nothing more. You'll be miserable. No, I'll be thankful that I even get to spend time with my soulmates at all, considering my decision. You won't last long. Once your words are spoken, you are drawn to your soulmate. This isn't something you can just brush off. They'll be fine because they don't know and they have each other, but you will be hurting. Natasha signed knowingly. I'll be fine. I signed stubbornly. She shook her head and sighed. All right. If this is how you want to do this, then you're right. It's your choice. But just know that we don't support this decision. You deserve happiness too, Angel. And you'll only get that with Steve and Bucky. She cupped my cheek in her hand and I leaned into the contact, giving her a weak smile. I'll be okay. If it gets too bad, then I'll tell them. How about that? They both seemed only slightly mollified by my words, but I knew that it was enough that they would agree to my terms, for now. Now we have to go back in there and explain what just happened and try to get everything back to normal so they don't all think I'm crazy right off the bat. I reached over and snatched the pad of paper and pencil I had placed on the counter when we entered the kitchen and took a deep breath. Now to go back in there and face everyone after that weird scene. So much for making a good first impression. I hesitantly stepped back into the living room, Natasha and Clint following silently. I gave the two soldiers a half-apologetic, half-shy smile. I gripped my pencil and began writing out an apology. Thank God that my handwriting was readable and not chicken scratch, like Clint's. Sorry about all that. It was just a family thing, nothing to worry about. Anyway, I'm Angel. It's nice to meet you. Neither one of them looked entirely convinced, but they must have decided to let it slide because neither of them pressed. It's nice to meet you, Angel. Clint has told us a lot about you. Steve smiled down as me and I inwardly winced at the implication. He waited patiently for me to write out my next note, and laughed when he read it. Whatever he told you, unless they were good things, isn't true. They were all good things. Steve assured me easily, and I relaxed at his easygoing nature. Bucky pushed off the wall where he had been leaning, garnering my attention. I don't know. I seem to remember him mentioning something about a party when you were 18. He grinned as I blushed and shot a glare Clint's way. He made a big show of not seeing it and whistling innocently. That was one time, I wrote in small lettering, trying to convey my sheepishness. The two men in front of me chuckled. What's this about a party that our little angel got involved in? Tony jumped in from the couch where he and Bruce had begun cuddling sometime during the talk in the kitchen. It was adorable, really. Big, bad Iron Man got cuddles from the Hulk. Clint perked up from the chair he had perched on and I groaned. Well, you see, friends, where is the Lady Barton? I must meet my comrades in arms daughter, boomed a boisterous voice as a man that I could only assume was Thor stepped out of the elevator, followed closely by three women and another man. While I wasn't exactly sure who the three women were, I knew that the black man had to be Sam Wilson, the Falcon, as he was the only other member of the Avengers that I had yet to meet besides Thor. If I thought Steve and Bucky were huge, Thor was just a poster boy for steroids. What was in the water on Asgard? Before anything, Thor spotted me. I braced for impact, knowing that he was a very physical kind of guy from the stories Natasha and Clint had told me. Lady Barton. It is so good to meet the family of the fierce warriors Eye of Hawk and Widow, he exclaimed before picking me up in a huge, crushing hug. I swore I heard a rib crack. Not being able to say anything, I patted his shoulder, trying to convey my greeting as well as my plea to let me down before I suffocated. Thor, she can't speak to tell you that you're hugging her too tight, put her down before you crush her. One of the women hurriedly spoke up, seeing my predicament. Thor immediately put me down gently, belaying his earlier strength, and apologized profusely as I stumbled. Warm hands caught me before I fell and I looked up into Steve's worried eyes. Are you okay? Not wanting to write something out, I simply nodded my head and gave him a thumbs up, gulping down deep breaths to my oxygen-deprived lungs. You sure, doll? I know Thor can take a lot out of a person. Bucky said, coming to stand next to Steve and giving me a once-over. He smirked. But you look fine to me. He winked as I blushed at his double meaning. Steve sighed in exasperation, but I couldn't help but notice that he, too, gave me a quick once-over. My blush deepened at the thought that both of them were checking me out. While I was still determined to keep things strictly platonic between the three of us, I knew I would definitely struggle if they were always like this. Even before they had said my words I had been attracted to them, this just made their handsomeness stand out even more. I gripped my pencil and, to distract myself from the delicious super soldiers standing right next to me, I turned back to the newcomers, my hands flying across the page. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Angel, as everyone seems to already know. I know you're Thor. Thor grinned at me and nodded. He might have been huge but I was already viewing him as a big, old teddy bear. And I'm guessing you're Sam. The man in question gave me a sweet smile and nodded as well. But I'm afraid that I don't know who you three are. I finished, turning to the three mystery women that had entered with Thor and Sam. The woman who had saved me from suffocating spoke up first. I'm Jane, Thor's soulmate. It's nice to meet you as well, Angel. She gave me a small smile and Thor indulgently swung his massive arm around her shoulders, bringing her in for a loving squeeze. I'm Pepper, CEO of Stark Industries and one of the only ones that can put up with the man himself. Pepper winked as Tony snorted from over on the couch. If Thor ever gets too enthusiastic with his hugs again, don't be afraid to hit him over the back of the head. That might be the only way he'll listen to you. The last woman piped up, grinning and holding out her hand for me to shake. Let me introduce myself in the proper way as only I know how. I am Darcy, babysitter of the Science Triad, Epic Pulley Psi Major, and she who tasered Thor. I laughed as I heard Tony mumbling that he didn't need a babysitter and Bruce telling him to shut up. So that's why your floor button has a taser on it, huh? I kind of wondered about that. Nice to meet you, she who tasered Thor. She looped her arm through mine and dragged me over to the side of the couch that wasn't taken up by the Bruce and Tony cuddlefest. I can tell we're going to be great friends already. I was thinking of something to write when she cried out. Wait, I must know, do you like music? I know you can't sing, but do you like listening to it? I nodded hesitantly, not sure where this was heading. Perfect. If you didn't like music, I was going to have to end this friendship before it began. She nodded sagely, as if the liking of music was the only thing that meant a friendship could survive. And, I had to admit, I had never known a friendship that didn't have at least one song that they'd always sing along with. Of course I like music. I love all kinds, not just one genre. While you're obviously right in saying that I can't sing in the normal way, I can sing through sign. It's more like dancing with your hands than singing, but I personally think it has a kind of grace to it. She seemed thoughtful at my words and then dazzled me with a brilliant smile. Hey, we could have a concert. I can sing and you can sign, that would be so cool. Okay, we're totally doing it now, no questions. Who's coming to Angel and I's concert? Everyone, already used to Darcy's, well, Darcy-ness, merely grinned and RSVP'd indulgently. I'm looking forward to seeing someone sign sing. I've never seen anything like it that I can remember. Have you, punk? Steve shook his head as Bucky collapsed on the couch next to me and Darcy, jostling us and making us giggle. He threw his arm over the back of the couch comfortably, smirking. Yep, this was definitely going to be hard. From the smirks Natasha and Clint were sporting, they knew exactly what I was thinking. I chose to ignore them. UG. There is too much super soldier love over here. Capsicle, come join Buckaroo. Brucky and I will move to the love seat. I'm getting fangirl all over me. Tony complained good-naturedly as he dragged Bruce away from us. Steve chuckled at my confused expression, having not understood Tony's actions. Tony likes to act as if he doesn't like me and Bucky and says that we get too lovey around him. But we're actually all good friends here, like a family, and he and Bruce are 10 times worse than Bucky and I are. He winked at me as Tony squawked indignantly in the background. Steve ignored him and sat down next to Bucky, shifting so the other man could lean against his chest. It should have looked weird, one super buff man leaning casually on another, but they made it seem right. I glanced over at Natasha and Clint, trying to tell them with my eyes that this was exactly what I was talking about. They were perfect without me in the mix. They just frowned and shook their heads, silently telling me that they still didn't agree with my decision. But it didn't matter. I was me and they were them. They didn't need me in the mix. Okay, so the first thing we need to so is to pick a song out for our concert. It was the day after our first meeting and Darcy had wasted no time stealing me away from breakfast that morning to drag me down to her apartment. Her rooms were arranged strangely, with furniture thrown around almost haphazardly. Each wall was painted a different color, but they had so many posters plastered on them that you could barely make out the clashing colors anyway. Knick-knacks and a variety of weird objects littered every available space that wasn't taken up by brightly colored clothes that were strewn around the room like a hurricane had gone through. It was truly a perfect environment for someone like Darcy. At first I thought we could do some kind of rock song, because hell yes, but then I realized that that might be a bit too hard to sign. So then I was like, well, what about a country song? Then I realized that I despise country and that thought should have never even popped into my head. Honestly, I was kind of frightened for my sanity. Well, what's left of it after working with Jane for so long. I nodded my head at all the right moments, not really sure that she was looking for any of my input here. Darcy seemed to know where she was going, so I just decided to let her roam. From the way the other residents of the tower treated her, that seemed to be the easiest way to handle her. So anyway, I was trying to think of a song that would be pretty to listen to and sing and sign, and then it just hit me. She threw her hands out excitedly, nearly hitting me in the face in the process. We can do a romantic song. I mean, I know both of us are single, but I think that we can summon enough emotion to make the song seem touching, don't you think? I nodded once more and uncapped my pen, seeing that she was actually giving me time to respond. I like the idea of a romantic song. It would be easier to sign, and who doesn't love to listen to a romantic song every once in a while? Darcy grinned in triumph. That's exactly what I was thinking. We still need to actually pick out a song though. I pointed out, and Darcy paused, looking deep in thought. I half-heartedly tried to think of a song as well, but I figured that Darcy would just come up with something and that would be that. I could already tell that Darcy was someone you really couldn't argue with. She suddenly jerked me out of my thoughts with an abrupt snap of her fingers, her eyes sparkling madly. I supposed that that was her idea face. I got it. Okay, so I hate the Twilight series, I mean, who thinks stalking and staring is romantic? But I love that one song that Christina Perri sang. Oh, what was its name? I lit up, instantly knowing the song she was referring to. It's called 1,000 Years. I definitely agree that that would be a good song to do. She clapped her hands in excitement and I grinned, her enthusiasm rubbing off on me. It was impossible to be immune to her wild and electric personality. Jarvis, download the karaoke version of 1,000 Years by Christina Perri. Darcy ordered, her eyes aimed towards the ceiling as if she could actually see the AI. Right away, Ms. Lewis. Jarvis responded primly. After a couple of moments, the TV turned on, showing us that he had indeed downloaded it and had it ready to go. I took the liberty of also downloading the lyrics so you can begin memorizing them, Ms. Lewis. Darcy laughed in delight. You're the best, Jarv. The absolute best. She turned her eyes back down to me. Do you need, like, your own sign language lyrics so you know what to sign, or will you know by just looking at the words? I'll know by just looking at the words. I'm sure I won't come across any I don't know. I wrote and gave her a wry smile. She looked a little sheepish. Yeah, sorry. That was probably a stupid question. I shrugged but didn't try to deny it. That fact didn't escape Darcy's notice and she pursed her lips, giving me a good glare. I snickered. You're lucky you're so cute. Alright, smartass, let's get going. JARV, play the music. After a couple of run-throughs, Darcy declared that we were done for the day and that we would pick up again after breakfast tomorrow. I couldn't hold back a grin at the thought of spending another morning just having fun with Darcy. I could already tell that Darcy would be a constant presence in my life at the tower, and I was glad that I had found such a good friend so quickly. So, we have a few hours to kill before I'm scheduled to deliver lunch down to the science triad. What do you want to do? I shrugged. Well, what do you usually do? I usually just watch some Netflix or catch some more Z's. She replied easily, slouching down on the couch and pulling out a remote from somewhere beneath a bundle of multicolored blankets and throws. What do you like to watch? I asked. Out on the farm, we had never really gotten good reception, so we had been stuck watching regular TV. And, since I had younger siblings, the TV was usually turned to whatever channel was showing SpongeBob. The usual I guess. Doctor Who, Supernatural, Once Upon a Time, that kind of thing. What about you? I looked at my pad of paper uncomfortably, scribbling a little in the corner. She sat up a little straighter, looking at me seriously now. You haven't watched any of those shows, have you? I shook my head and shrunk into the couch, expecting to be made fun of. Instead, she just placed her hand gently on my arm. My dear, I am about to ruin your life. But you'll love me for it. Which one should we start with? Not really knowing anything about any of the aforementioned TV shows, I just chose one at random. Once Upon a Time? She grinned at me approvingly before slumping back down on the couch. Good choice, good choice. Besides, Doctor Who and Supernatural might be a bit much for your first foray into the wonderful world of fandoms. Once is tame compared to the other two. She looked over to me and winked devilishly as she began the first episode of Season 1. Don't you worry, Angel. I'll make a fangirl of you yet. But we can't just stop there. He just died. Darcy just grinned at me wickedly. Yup. She said, popping the P at the end. Now, it's time to go serve lunch to the science triad. She said cheerfully as she dragged me away from my spot on her couch. I glared at her as we made our way down to the food emporium that Tony had built for both the Avengers and his employees. There was even a subway, which was where we were headed. "You are a cruel, cruel woman, Darcy Lewis." She gave her best maniacal laugh as we got in line to order subs. "Just you wait, it gets better. I can't wait until we get to season 2 and I get to introduce you to Hook." She pretended to swoon and I caught her, laughing. I had no idea who she was talking about, but considering the premise for the show, I would have to guess she was talking about Captain Hook. I wondered if we would also meet Peter Pan. When we got to the front of the line, we ordered a sandwich for each of the 3 scientists, as well as one for ourselves. Juggling 2 of the 5 sandwiches I managed to write on my paper. "So, how are we going to do this, since they all have separate labs?" Darcy somehow waved her hand in a dismissing gesture, despite the amount of sandwiches she held. "Tony is always in Bruce's lab with him. He really only works in his lab after a mission or late at night when we're all in bed. Anything else he does is actually up in Bruce's lab because he's constantly there. Jane is the only one that we'll have to make an extra stop for, and she might just follow us to Bruce's lab when she finally gets out of her science haze to smell the food. Then we go deliver the boys' food." I followed Darcy to Jane's side and stifled my laughter when she balanced Jane's sandwich on top of Jane's head. Jane was so focused on her work that she didn't even realize it was there until she nodded at one of her equations and the sandwich fell onto her keyboard, causing her to yelp in surprise. "Darcy, I've told you not to do that," she chastised with a smile as she unwrapped her meal and began eating. Darcy pouted. "Not following us to Bruce's lab today?" Jane shook her head as she turned back to her work, talking around the food in her mouth. "No, I'm close to finding the last piece of the puzzle I need. I can't just stop now, it's right here. I know it." Darcy gave me an exasperated look before walking away from her scatterbrained friend. "Just don't forget to eat," she shouted over her shoulder as she led me up the stairs to Bruce's lab. Bruce was looking at something in a microscope but stood up as Darcy and I entered, rubbing his tired eyes and giving us a small smile. Tony was lounging on a couch nearby, playing with some holograms coming from his phone. Seeing us enter, he banished the holograms and got up, rubbing his hands together eagerly. "Yum. Lewis, you're hired," she laughed and shook her head. "I don't have your sandwich this time, Angel does." Tony looked from her to me and I waved slightly, holding out his sandwich for him to take. "Fine then. Lewis, you're fired, and Angel, you're hired," he amended, and I stuck my tongue out at Darcy in triumph. She just rolled her eyes. Tony laughed and shook his finger at me. Now, play nice. I need all my employees to get along." "But she's not your employee anymore. You just fired her," I wrote with a grin. "Good point. You may continue." I laughed as Tony wandered back over to the couch, munching on his sandwich. "That's the last time I let you deliver Tony his sandwich." Darcy grumbled good-naturedly as she passed off Bruce's sandwich to him. "Don't worry, I'll probably get fired for not having a Stark phone." "What? That's it, Angel, you're fired," Tony shouted, causing me giggle. Darcy winced in fake sympathy. "I feel for you, Ange. I do. We can be fired together. Deal?" I nodded and we giggled as we watched Tony continue angrily chewing his sandwich. "You're getting a Stark phone. Made by me, personally. I'll have it ready for you by tomorrow," he grumbled, still keeping up the act of being mad. "What, not by tonight?" I teased. He smirked and opened his mouth to reply when Bruce interrupted. "Don't encourage him, Angel. Just eat." I went to protest, but Bruce simply raised an eyebrow and I backed down, feeling like a kid that had been scolded. That didn't stop Tony, Darcy and I from bantering back and forth the entire time we ate, Bruce watching on like an amused father. Eventually though, Darcy said she had to go check on Jane to make sure she had actually eaten more than just the bite we had seen her take. Soon I was left alone with Bruce and Tony. At first I felt a bit awkward, but Tony nipped that in the bud easily. "So, I said I'd learn sign language. I did it. Are you impressed?" I stared at him, mouth open wide as Tony signed nearly perfectly, his fingers only fumbling a few times. He grinned. "I'll take that as a yes." "How did you? It's only been a day." I signed back at him, testing him. Sure enough, he signed back. "I'm a genius, or did you forget? That just isn't possible." "It is for Tony Stark." I turned to Bruce, hoping to find some solid ground here. He gave me a small smile. Yes, he really is signing. He stayed up last night learning it. He really did just learn it in a night. Tony preened under the attention he was getting from me and his soulmate. Yep. Yesterday I learned a new language and today I will be building a phone for you from scratch. I even impress myself sometimes. He bragged, smirking. I huffed out a laugh. How do you fit that ego through the door? Same way we fit the Hulk. He shot back instantly and I choked on a laugh as Bruce rolled his eyes heavenward. Now, I need to go start on your phone. You and Brucky have a nice chat. He got up and exited the room, despite my assurances that I really didn't need a new phone. He just waved me off. After he left, it was quiet. I sighed. I really didn't know how to start up a conversation with Bruce. He was very reclusive and shy from what I was told, and really only interacted with Tony and, occasionally, Jane and Darcy. Don't worry about Tony. He does things like this for people he considers family. It's just how he shows his affection. It can be a bit much, but you get used to him. Bruce finally signed to me, as if he too were being suffocated by the dreaded silence that had surrounded us. Even though signing wasn't really taking up the silence, it still felt like it was. I smiled slightly. He thinks of me as family, of course. Not only are you Natasha and Clint's daughter but you're also, well, he stopped signing and shifted uncomfortably. I nodded, encouraging him to continue with his thought. Well, you're also not treating me any differently. That instantly gets you in Tony's good books. Not a lot of people can be in the same room as me and not be terrified of the other guy coming out. He signed slowly, looking down at his fingers as he did so to avoid eye contact. I frowned, growing angry. Here was this sweet man that had been given a shitty hand in life, and because of it, people treated him like a monster. It just wasn't right. Swallowing down my anger at the world, I let my expression soften as I moved my head down to catch his eyes before I signed my reply. As long as you don't treat me differently, I won't treat you any differently either. We both have things that make us different from other people. I get treated like an outcast because I can't communicate in the usual way. It's not the same thing. Actually, it kind of is. We both get ostracized because of things we can't control and it isn't right. So, of course I'm not going to treat you badly. I paused, considering my words before I signed again with a bright smile directed at him. Besides, if you're the Hulk and you're nice, then I just have to assume that the Hulk can be nice as well. I shrugged and relaxed back into the chair, feeling satisfied. I wanted Bruce to know that he wasn't a monster in my eyes, and by his expression I had succeeded. He stared at me with a tinge of awe creeping. I think the Hulk just purred. I looked at him strangely. Of all the things he could have said next, I was not expecting that. What? He purred. He only does that when he's happy, and so far Tony has been the only one he ever liked enough to purr for. Suddenly a blazing grin spread across Bruce's face. I think he likes you, Angel. And, that's a good thing I'm guessing? Good? It's fantastic? That means he's accepting more people. That he's capable of accepting more people. This is a breakthrough. The Hulk can like people other than my soulmate. We thought the only reason he tolerated Tony was because of his connection to me, but now I can assume that that isn't true. Angel, this is huge. I smiled at him, happy to see that he had momentarily shed his insecure shell. Bruce seemed like a really nice guy, and I was glad that I was getting to know the real him and not the mask he put on for other people. But, one thing bothered me. Surely there have been other people that just accepted you for who you were before me. I can't be the first person. I winced as I saw him deflate a bit. No, you're not the first person. That would be Tony, followed by Darcy, but I don't think the Hulk likes her because she is so scattered. Everyone else has had a healthy dose of fear before they even met me. He brightened again and gave me a shy but gleeful smile. You're one of the only ones that just immediately saw me for me, and not for the other guy. I grinned back at him. Glad I could help. Bruce began to calm down and blushed slightly. Sorry, I just got excited there for a moment. No, it's okay. Bruce fidgeted with his lab coat before sending me a slightly pleading look. Would you mind coming back tomorrow? I want to see if this was just a fluke of if the Hulk really does like you. That and, well, I honestly enjoy your company. You keep Tony out of my hair for a little while and also ask insightful questions. Not that Darcy isn't nice, but her presence isn't as calming, I suggested, and he sent me another smile. I was pretty sure I had seen him smile more than most of the people in the building had. Yes, calming. Would you mind terribly? I shook my head, grinning at the shy man in front of me. I don't mind at all, Dr. Banner. Please, call me Bruce. Bruce then. I suppose now would be a good time to point out that this might mean the Hulk can understand sign language as well as English. I giggled as Bruce's eyes widened and his mouth dropped open in shock. As Bruce then began frantically pacing the lab, muttering to himself about the implications of that, I quietly got up and left him to his pondering, happy to have made another new friend in the tower. After careful consideration, I decided to head back up to my room to get some more unpacking done. As much as I wanted to explore New York, I knew it could be dangerous to wander around without knowledge of the city. I would have to wait until Clint or Natasha would take me sightseeing, maybe Darcy if she was up for it. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice where I was going until I ran into a wall. When said wall steadied me and kept me from falling, I looked up and saw Bucky looking down at me in amusement, Steve by his side. "Where are you going, doll?" he asked, and I blushed at the term of endearment. "I'm only going to be their friend. I'm only going to be their friend." I repeated the mantra in my head as I wrote out my response to his question. Back up to my room. "Why?" Bucky shook his head. "No, you're not. You're coming with me and Stevie to go sightseeing." I blinked in surprise at his assertion, and he used my hesitation to drag me towards the elevator, Steve hot on our heels. "It's best to just go with it. Besides, what's a trip to New York without a little sightseeing?" Steve asked warmly, and I shrugged, uncomfortable. While I was okay with being their friend, I hadn't realized that I would be spending so much time with the soldiers. It would be harder to wrench myself away from them if I got too close to them. Bucky seemed to sense my hesitation because he turned me to face him, eyes stern. "You can't explore New York alone, correct?" I nodded unsurely. "And Natasha and Clint are nowhere to be found, correct?" I sighed and nodded again. "Then who better to show you around New York than us?" I didn't really have an argument for that, and I really did want to get out and see the sights. I was just afraid of screwing up. Natasha's warning that I wouldn't last long rang through my brain. Still seeing my hesitation, Bucky's face closed off, a mask slipping into place. The sight of it made me want to cry. I didn't mean to hurt him with my indecision, unless, of course, you just don't want to go with us. My eyes widened and I vehemently shook my head, immediately beginning to write out my response to salvage the situation. No, it's just I'm sure you have better things to do than show me around the city. I don't want you to feel like you have to show me around, just because I'm Clint and Natasha's daughter." Bucky eyed me, as if to see if I was really telling the truth. I hoped he found nothing but sincerity in my eyes. "You sure it's not because you're afraid of me?" he asked quietly. Steve shifted and wrapped his arm around Bucky's shoulder in comfort. "Buck, no, it's okay if she is. I wouldn't blame her." I watched the exchange in confusion. "Why would I be scared of you?" I wrote timidly, and the two men in front of me stared. I shrunk back under their gazes. "You don't know about my history?" Recognition dawned on me as I realized he was referring to the time he spent as the Winter Soldier. I wanted to facepalm. How stupid could I be? "No, I mean, yes, I know your history, but no, I'm not afraid of you." "If I'm not afraid of the Hulk, why should I be afraid of you?" I put my hand on his arm in comfort before going back to writing. "I promise I'm not scared of you. You've been nothing but nice to me. If you really want to take me sightseeing and don't feel like it's an obligation, I would love to go see the sights. I'm sorry I made you think otherwise." I bit my lip and looked up at both of them expectantly, waiting for them to read my note. Steve finished first, sending me a blinding smile. Bucky looked from me to the note and then back before his shoulders that had hunched and tension eased. "I'm glad you aren't afraid of me," he said quietly, and I couldn't help but throw my arms around him as best I could, giving him a hug. There was a moment of shock from the both of us. I could tell by him freezing up, and I quickly started to move back, blushing furiously. I had just wanted to prove that I trusted him. I hadn't even thought about whether or not he would welcome physical contact. Before I could move far though, he wrapped his huge arms around me and squeezed gently, returning my hug. I stepped back after a few more seconds and bit my lip, looking down at the ground. Steve and Bucky chuckled at my awkwardness. "Well, if we're going to go sightseeing, we might want to press an elevator button," Steve suggested, and I realized that we had been standing in the unmoving elevator this whole time. I blushed an even deeper shade of red and pressed the ground floor button, finally feeling the elevator descend. As we entered the lobby, I had a sudden thought and paused. The two soldiers noticed my absence by their side and glanced back to find me. "What's up, Angel? Is it even a good idea for you guys to go out? Won't you get swarmed by rabid fans or something?" They laughed and shook their heads. "Nah, the people of New York have started to get used to us. We may have to deal with a few autographs or something usually, but today we'll just ask them to excuse us since we're on touring duty. If you're sure, we wouldn't go out if we weren't. Don't you worry about us, doll. Let's worry about where we're going to go. Any ideas? Where do you guys think we should go? You're the tour guides. What's our itinerary?" I teased, grinning cheekily as Steve laughed. "Well, we could go to the Statue of Liberty. You know, start out your sightseeing with a bang," Bucky suggested, and I tilted my head in consideration. "I don't know, Buck. That might be a bit much for her first real trip out to New York." "Anything will be a bit much to someone who wasn't born and raised here. Besides, Angel here is the daughter of the widow and the hawk. She can handle it, right?" I laughed and nodded, enjoying the fact that they weren't just excluding me from their conversation. "Are you sure? That's one of the major tourist attractions, so there will be a lot of people," Steve cautioned, and I smiled. "I'll just stick close to the two of you. I'm sure it'll be fine." "So, to Lady Liberty?" I grinned, excitement seeping into me. My first real trip out. To Lady Liberty. I stared up in awe at the gigantic Statue of Liberty. She was even more magnificent than I could ever begin to describe. I couldn't get over the sheer enormity of the statue and all it stood for. It was incredible to be able to experience. Even surrounded by fellow tourists taking pictures and jostling for the best position in front of the lady, I still felt like it was worth the hustle and bustle. I turned back to the super soldiers, who were right behind me, both studiously ignoring all the cameras that were aimed in their direction and not the statue. They truly were saints. "I can't believe that I'm actually in front of the Statue of Liberty. I never thought I would ever see it up close and personal like this." I was practically bouncing in my excitement, much to Steve and Bucky's amusement. Bucky rolled his eyes, but I could tell from the mischievous glint that it was all in good fun. "Tourists," he muttered, and I stuck my tongue out at him. "You're the one that insisted on showing me around New York. Let me embrace my inner tourist." Bucky snickered but raised his hands in surrender when I shook my finger at him. All right, pushy. Anyway, are we almost done here? I'm getting hungry." "You're always hungry," Steve pointed out, earning a jab in the ribs from Bucky's elbow. "So are you." I raised my pad of paper and swatted them both, gaining their surprised attention. I blushed but decided to ignore how comfortable I already felt with them and began writing. "Okay, enough children. We can go eat after I get a picture in front of Lady Liberty." "Okay, do you want one of us to take the picture for you?" Steve asked as I wrestled my phone out of my non-existent pocket. "Damn you women's jean designers." I shook my head and gestured for them to come stand by me. I figured that if I really was going to fall for the soldiers, which already seemed inevitable, and then have to walk away from them, I was going pictures to remember them by. They looked confused but did as they were told, coming to stand on either side of me. I positioned the phone, trying to get the best angle where I could see all of us and the statue. Finally understanding what I was doing and realizing the difficulty with our differing heights, Steve gently picked me up with one arm so that I was basically sitting between the two of them. I was blushing hard and couldn't help but notice the envious glares many of the females in the area were shooting at me. Deciding that, for my own sanity, I would ignore the sweet gesture, I repositioned my phone before taking the picture. I looked at it to make sure it was good and smiled happily when I saw that it had turned out perfectly. "Nice shot. You'll have to send that to us," Steve complimented as he carefully set me back down on me feet. "Sure, just give me your numbers and I will. Do you want to head back to the tower to eat? In return for helping me out in the city? Maybe I can help you get updated on the 21st century. Darcy mentioned that you still need help with that." I wanted to slap myself. What was I doing? I already knew this was going to end badly for me, and here I was, offering to spend more time with them. I must have really hated myself. Well, in for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. Yeah, Darcy used to be in charge of that, but I think her version of pop culture is a bit skewed by her personal tastes. Steve grumbled as he took my phone and began programming his and Bucky's numbers into it. There you go. Well, she must have done something right. You know how to use a cell phone, they scoffed. That wasn't because of her teachings, that was because we read the instructions. I stared at them in slight horror. Wait, you read the entire phone manual? They nodded. Oh good lord. You two need some serious help if you had to resort to that to learn. Probably, we never really got caught up on pop culture. I mean, we have the basics, we can navigate in this century, but it's still frustrating sometimes. Steve mentioned as we began making our way away from the statue. Yeah, I never understand Stark's references. The other day he called Clint Legolas. What does that even mean? I gaped at them once again, shocked by their lack of knowledge. Okay, first thing on the list of movies to watch is Lord of the Rings. Come on, we're going to go watch them. Like, yesterday. I grabbed both of their hands and began tugging them along, not really registering that I was holding their hands. When we got back to the tower, I immediately sat them down in front of my TV and had Jarvis put on the first movie while I made enough popcorn to feed an army. I knew the super soldiers had a fast metabolism, so I figured that even with the popcorn they wouldn't ruin their dinner. We got through the first one and about half of the second before Jarvis informed us that dinner was being served. We went upstairs together, chatting about what we had seen so far of the movies, and I couldn't help but laugh at their enthusiasm to watch the rest of the movie and start the third one. As we entered the common room, Natasha and Clint eyed me knowingly, but I elected to ignore them. I knew that I was setting myself up for heartbreak, but I knew that this way would be better for them. And, after all, wasn't putting your soulmates first the right thing to do? My life seemed to slip into a routine. I would wake up and have breakfast with the whole group. I learned Steve made the best pancakes and Tony just threw cereal at us, before I was dragged out by Darcy for our concert practice. I enjoyed spending time with Darcy and she quickly became my best friend in the tower. She was wild, quirky, and talked enough for the both of us. After a couple of hours of practice, goofing off, and once upon a time, I would help Darcy deliver lunch to the science triad and then hang out with one, two, or all three of them for about an hour as we all ate. While I got along well with Jane and fantastically with Tony, it was Bruce that I really just seemed to click with. After that first talk when we realized the Hulk liked me, he became something of a mentor and confidant to me and I became a safe zone for him, where he didn't have to worry about the Hulk getting loose. I thought Tony might get jealous of how much time I was spending with his mate, but I couldn't have been more wrong. On one of the days that Bruce was in a haze of science-wide things, Tony quietly confided in me that he was glad that Bruce had another friend, another connection to the real world, and that I was good for him. Of course, right after that he immediately went back to being the playful Tony Stark that everyone knew, but I was touched that Tony thought so highly of me. After lunch was over, I almost always seemed to run into Bucky and Steve coming back from their own meal after their gym workouts. I had a sneaking suspicion that Clint or Natasha were somehow behind that, but didn't say anything as I found I really enjoyed my time with the super soldiers. After that first trip to the Statue of Liberty, we agreed to go back and forth on what we would do. Sometimes we stayed in and I continued to educate them on modern movies and games. I would always regret joining in a Nerf gun war with them, and sometimes we went out so I could sightsee. Though a lot of things had changed since the 40s, they still somehow knew where all the best tourist spots were, and the best places to get a hot dog or a burger if we got hungry later on. As the three of us got closer and closer, I began to really get to know them and fall for them, not just as my soulmates but as people I knew and respected. It was hard, knowing I could never be with them on the path I was choosing to follow. I knew Clint and Natasha still wanted me to tell them about my marks, but at this point I was so afraid of rejection and the pain it would bring that every time I had a chance to tell them I chickened out. I tried not to let my growing romantic feelings towards them get in the way of our friendship, but it was hard when they always managed to do things that set my heart aflutter. Like when Bucky would pull me into his warm chest so I could lean against him on movie days, or when Steve would tuck my hair behind my ear when I looked down to blush, smiling gently at me. And they had taken to calling me doll and sweetheart. They also always seemed to know when I needed someone to talk to, always appearing at my side and asking what was wrong and if they could help. I couldn't help but wonder if they were subconsciously drawn to me as I was to them, despite the fact that they didn't know we were soulmates. After my fun, yet heart-wrenching afternoon with my oblivious soulmates, we went up and had dinner with the rest of the team. Dinner was always an interesting affair with stories, and, more often than not, food being thrown around and laughter warming the atmosphere. While breakfast was a family event as well, it was not as energetic as supper, as almost everyone had yet to have enough caffeine in them to hold a proper conversation. Dinner, however, was never a quiet affair, with Thor's booming voice telling of his battles past, Tony snarking back and forth with Darcy, Bruce, and I, Steve and Bucky teasing and joking with each other and me, and Clint and Natasha whispering to themselves about old missions. I loved it. Usually after that we all went our separate ways to spend time alone or with soulmates, but I started a tradition of, once a week, having a movie night with everyone together. Those nights were the best, as well as the worst, mostly because of course, Steve and Bucky. No matter how far away I seemed to sit from them in the beginning, I always ended up curled into one of their chests by the end of the film. On one occasion, after an especially tiring day, I actually fell asleep on Steve's chest. I woke up the next morning in my own bed and, when questioned, Jarvis informed me that Steve had helped to put me to bed with Natasha's blessing. I swear I blushed every time I looked at Steve that day, much to his and Bucky's amusement. This pattern kept up until the night of the concert. Darcy and I had practiced until we had it perfect, her voice complementing my dancing hands beautifully. Even Jarvis seemed to like our practice performance, saying it was quite enjoyable. While everyone had been super supportive about it, assuring me that I would do fine and it'd be great, I was still nervous. "We'll do fine. Stop freaking out, and stop wringing your hands. You'll hurt the moneymakers," Darcy said with a wink, and I rolled my eyes. I couldn't help being nervous with the thought of everyone watching me. I wasn't like Tony, who adored attention. I sat on the couch, on edge, waiting for everyone to show up. We were performing right before supper that night, so everyone would be here. "Relax, doll," Bucky whispered in my ear from where he was sitting next to me, and I couldn't help a slight shiver from rolling down my spine. If Bucky's smirk was anything to go by, he noticed it too. I blushed. "I can't help it, what if I screw up?" I wrote quickly, trying to distract myself from how close Bucky had gotten to me. I had learned fairly quickly that Bucky had no sense of personal space, at least when it came to me. From the other side of Bucky, Steve grinned. "Sweetheart, you'll do fine. And, even if you do mess up, most of us wouldn't realize it." I laughed as he gave me a mock scowl. Both Bucky and Steve had pleaded with me to teach them sign language, but I had declined, saying that it would be easier for them to learn from someone who could talk them through it. It was a legitimate reason, but I was really just worried that if they learned sign language that they would catch my conversations with Natasha and Clint, who were getting more and more emphatic that I should inform the two super soldiers that I was their other soulmate. Not to mention my talks with Tony and Bruce, who had both figured out pretty quickly by the blushes and attempted subject changes that something was going on between me and the soldiers. Tony constantly teased me about wanting to spice up the Capsicle and Tin Man's sex life. And even Bruce was beginning to push me towards revealing my growing feelings. Between Clint and Natasha on one side and Bruce and Tony on the other, it seemed that everyone wanted me to get with Steve and Bucky. Actually, a little under half the people watching know sign language. So, it's more like half the people wouldn't know if she messes up. Darcy pointed out, making me sigh and causing Steve to shoot her a frown. Before he could say anything though, Tony waltzed in with his usual swagger, followed closely by the rest of Darcy and I's audience. "Okay, let's get this show on the road. I'm expecting this to be a showstopper because I was working on my suit and Bucky dragged me away, so I hope this will be worth it," Tony complained good-naturedly. I held back a snicker as Bucky grumbled under his breath that Tony should be grateful that anyone would want to entertain his smartass. Bruce rolled his eyes and gave a small smile directed at me, and I couldn't help but smile back. "Okay, let's do this, Angel. Stop flirting with Bucky and get your butt over here," Darcy exclaimed, causing me to blush a deep cherry red and Bucky to chuckle. "Go on. You'll do great, doll," Bucky whispered as he gently pushed me and with Darcy in the center of the room. I imagined that I looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming car, but Darcy seemed perfectly at ease as the center of attention. She cleared her throat importantly, making me huff exasperatedly at her antics. I knew the speech that would come next. "Ladies, gentlemen, and Thors, we have dragged you from your various loser pastimes for you to listen, watch Angel and I's fantabulous performance of 1,000 Years. Please, no flash photography, as it startles the angel. I gave her a glare at that improvised line. And no snarky side comments to your neighbors, that means you, Stark. After giving Tony a couple of moments to play up his mock offense at being called out, Darcy continued with her fanfare. Now, without further ado, Jarvis, start the music. Right away, Ms. Lewis. Jarvis calmly spoke and the lights dimmed everywhere but where Darcy and I were standing. The piano began playing in the background and I braced myself, telling myself that this would be no different than practicing with Darcy in her apartment. As the words began and I started signing, my eyes caught on Bucky and Steve's and I suddenly couldn't look away. Heartbeats, fast colors and promises how to be brave. How can I love when I'm afraid to fall, but watching you stand alone? All of my doubt suddenly goes away somehow, one step closer. I have died every day waiting for you, darling, don't be afraid, I have loved you. For 1,000 years I'll love you for 1,000 more. Darcy's clear, dulcet tones spilled into the air as everyone listened to her and watched my hands flow over the words of the song. Steve and Bucky never once looked away from me. I could still hear the music, I still understood that Darcy was next to me and the others were watching me, but it really just seemed to be me signing my heart out to the two men I had grown to love over the past month or so. Time stands still, beauty in all she is, I will be brave. I will not let anything take away what's standing in front of me. Every breath, every hour has come to this, one step closer. I have died every day waiting for you, darling, don't be afraid, I have loved you. For 1,000 years I'll love you for 1,000 more. My hands flowed across the signs with practiced ease, and I silently tried to convey my true feelings to the soldiers without having to really tell them. My doubt held me back. I wished I was as brave as the woman that was described in the song by Christina. I truly felt like I had waited forever to find my soulmates, and now that I had them, all I had to do was step closer and tell them. That's all I had to do, and yet I resisted. Why was I doing this to myself? And all along I believed I would find you, time has brought your heart to me. I have loved you for 1,000 years, I'll love you for 1,000 more. One step closer. One step closer. I have died every day waiting for you. Darling, don't be afraid, I have loved you for 1,000 years. I'll love you for 1,000 more. For the first time, Bucky and Steve broke eye contact with me, only to glance at each other. My heart, that had slowly been filling since the song started, burst. Of course they weren't looking at me like I was the girl in the song. The song must have reminded them of each other. Why else would they look at each other so long after listening to the song? My hands faltered at my thoughts, but I came back strong. Who cared? Well, obviously, I did, but I didn't need my soulmates to be happy. I had lived all these years without them. I could live my life without them. This was the plan. Not to intrude in their lives. I was their friend. And all along I believed I would find you, time has brought your heart to me. I have loved you for 1,000 years, I'll love you for 1,000 more. Even though I told myself that, I couldn't help looking away from the soldiers when they finally returned their sights to Darcy and I's performance. The trance the music seemed to cast on me broke when I heard the applause of our little audience with a few whistles from Clint and Tony, much to their mates' amusement. Darcy took my hand and raised an eyebrow, silently asking if I would bow with her. After a few seconds of hesitation I shrugged and we both dipped down into a big bow. I kept my fake smile plastered on my face as we went to mingle with the gang before we went to eat the pizza that was waiting for us in the dining room. Of course, Clint and Natasha were the first to approach me and give me a big hug. That was beautiful, Ange. And don't think we didn't notice who you were really singing to. I groaned as Clint gave an eyebrow wiggle worthy of Tony. You need to just tell them. This pining away is getting sickening. Natasha smirked with Clint emphatically nodding at her side. My fake smile faltered and I shook my head sadly. I saw the way they looked at each other. I have no right to interrupt that. Angel, I don't know what you saw, but I saw two men that have longing written all over them. They want you just as much as you want them, but are confused as to why their attraction is so strong and visceral. I sighed, not wanting to get into this with them with other people in the room capable of reading our signs and interpreting our conversation. Not right now, okay. You can pester me about this later, but can I just have this moment? Please? They both gave me identical frowns of disapproval but moved off towards the kitchen, only to be replaced by Bruce. He tugged me off to a corner, boxing me in and cutting off any escape. Okay, what's going on? Angel, what do you mean? I signed innocently, wincing when he gave me a disapproving frown that mirrored Natasha and Clint's. Something is going on between you, Steve, and Bucky. I thought it was just a crush, but from what I just saw of your conversation with Natasha and Clint, this is so much more than that. What are you hiding? Nothing. Don't try to lie to me, Angel. You're terrible at it. I know it's really none of my business, and normally I wouldn't interfere, but I view you as a little sister and I know Tony does as well. You're important to us and I want to make sure everything is okay. He paused and gave me a stern look that I had never seen him use. So, what is going on? Don't try to get out of telling me. Everyone is already in the kitchen eating, save for those three, and Darcy, Steve, and Bucky don't know sign language. This is completely private, so you have no excuse. I bit my lip, glancing behind him to see that he was correct in saying that he was the only one that would understand. Almost everyone had already moved on into the kitchen to eat, save for Steve, Bucky, and Darcy. Darcy was chatting with the super soldiers and I got the feeling that Bruce put her up to distracting them so he could get a quiet word in with me. They seemed irritated at her constant stream of babble and kept glancing over at Bruce and I enough that Darcy should have gotten the hint, but it didn't stop her. I really shouldn't say anything, Bruce. Natasha and Clint are just being overbearing parents. Putting it out in the open will just cause problems. It's already causing a problem for you, and that is an issue to me. So, what is going on between you and our resident super soldiers? After a few agonizing moments of consideration, I finally blew out a deep breath. I could trust Bruce. Maybe he would give me some much-needed advice and support. Well, they're my soulmates. I finally signed quickly, ducking my head in shame. I waited through the awkward, stunned silence that came after my revelation, shifting uncomfortably. Finally I felt his work-calloused hands under my chin to lift my head back up so I could see his concerned face and his signs. They're right, Natasha and Clint You need to tell them. This isn't just about you, it's about them too. I understand where you're coming from, truly I do. Tony seemed happy enough without a soulmate and I felt like I was unneeded until Tony finally convinced me otherwise. They need you, just like Tony and I need each other and like you need them. Yes, they do need you. You're only seeing this from your side, but I've seen their side as well. They are drawn to you, just like you are to them. They wait for you after lunch, sometimes for 20 minutes or more, just so they can run into you in the halls. They're constantly vying for your attention at the dinner table and, if Steve is serving breakfast, you always get served right after Bucky. They've stopped what they were doing to go do something else with you, especially if it means you're all together. I see the little looks they throw at you when you're not paying attention. I see the side of this that you are somehow missing. They love you just as much as you love them. Whatever self-pitying vision you've concocted is wrong, and if you don't march your butt over there right now and tell them, I will. They deserve to know. I gaped at him, surprised at his sudden forcefulness. You wouldn't dare. His mouth thinned into a hard, disapproving line. I would and I will if you don't do this yourself, Angel. It's scientifically proven that once you find your soulmate or, in your case, soulmates, you will only be truly happy when you're with them. You might even pine away by denying the bond and, now that I know what this is all about, I can honestly say you're showing alarming signs of it already. Have you even noticed that you've been eating less and less and losing weight? There are bags under your eyes, so I would guess you're not sleeping properly either. I'm not going to watch you make yourself sick over this when you can easily be happy with them. I can only assume that they aren't showing signs of pining because that have each other to tide them over. Now, I am going to grab Darcy and eat and you are going to go and tell Steve and Bucky. Are we clear? I nodded meekly, still shocked that my shy, introverted friend could become so demanding. He eyed me for another moment before shaking his head and making his way over to Darcy, grabbing her wrist and dragging her out of the room, leaving me alone with my soldiers. My eyes must have been comically wide as they made their way over to me, bemusement marring their perfect features. They brought over my pad of paper and pencil with them, placing them into my noticeably shaking hands. Angel, what was that all about? What's wrong? I chewed on my lower lip and refused to look at them. Could I really tell them after an entire month of practically lying to them? Would they be mad? Or, worse, would they reject me, sweetheart? Steve jerked me out of my nervous thoughts, his warm hand cupping my cheek and raising my head so my eyes met his worried ones. Bucky grabbed my shaking hands and steadied them, frowning. "What did Bruce say to you, doll?" "I'll rough him up if I need to, Hulk or not," he growled, and I gave him a weak smile before shaking my head in the negative. "Then what did he say that's got you so upset? Talk to us, sweetheart." I noticed that the more worried that Steve became, the more he called me by my pet name. It was so wrong that I liked it. "I don't know if I can," I finally wrote, my nerves suppressing my fear of Bruce telling them. The men in front of me frowned down at my words. "What do you mean? You can tell us anything. We care about you very much." "You'll be mad at me," I wrote in small lettering. Bucky and Steve gave each other a look that I couldn't read before they dragged me into a hug, making me into a sandwich between them. "Even if you told us something that might anger us, we could never stay mad at you, Angel." I snuggled into their bodies, savoring their warmth before wiggling to free my arms so I could respond. "Promise you won't hate me? We could never hate you, sweetheart." Steve ran his hands lightly up and down my arms, trying to comfort me. He had the gentlest touch. I looked up at both of them only to find them already looking soft, encouraging smiles that made hope bloom in my chest. Maybe Bruce was right. Maybe I could tell them and everything would be fine. "Come on, doll. Just tell us. I get the feeling that this has been sitting on your chest for a while." I smiled slightly, realizing that they already knew me so well. Okay, I could do this. For them and for me. I backed my way out of the sandwich so I could write without having to jostle them. My hands began to shake again as I wrote the words that would change everything between the three of us. They waited patiently in front of me as I stared the words down, sending up a silent prayer that this wouldn't blow up in my face. I took a deep breath and readied myself for their reactions. When the alarm began blaring from the speakers, calling for the Avengers to assemble, Bucky and Steve glanced up at the flashing red lights and then back down at me apologetically. "Sorry, Angel. Duty calls. We'll finish this when we get back, okay?" I nodded silently, not wanting to even try to convey how hard it had been for me to work up the courage to talk about it now. Would I even be able to do it again? It hardly mattered now. I watched as they walked away, already in their Avenger mode, my admission already 8,000 miles away from their minds. As everyone cleared out of the room, either to go avenging or help set Avenger's suit up, I was left alone, still in the corner of the room. I felt a silent tear trickle down my cheek, and before I knew it, the dam had broken and I was a horrible, sobbing mess. I had been so close, yet so far. I think this was even worse than me just not telling them. As I crumpled to the ground, rolling into a little ball, my notepad lay forgotten on the floor with my unread confession. I must have cried myself to sleep, because the next thing I knew I was being rudely awakened by the crash of shattered glass. I screamed as I covered my face as shards of glass flew everywhere. I felt several embed themselves in my legs and hands as they ricocheted off the walls, eliciting another pained scream from me. People in black were swarming into the room, repelling from ropes outside the tower. I lowered my hands and stared in shock as they invaded the supposedly safe haven of the Avengers Tower. I shrunk back into the wall as a few of them finally noticed me sitting in the corner, dazed. "Is she the right one?" I heard one of them ask the one who seemed to be the leader of the group. "Doesn't matter. She's in the Avengers' quarters, so she must be important to them. Grab her and move out before they get back. We only have a small time frame here." As the man that spoke first made his way over to me, his big, black boots crunching the glass underfoot, I noticed the symbol proudly displayed on the arm of the man's uniform. A skull with 6 tentacles. Hydra. Before I had time to truly process what was going on, I was grabbed roughly by my arm and dragged towards the gaping hole in the side of the tower. The man's rough handling snapped me out of my shock and my self-preservation instincts kicked in. I may not have been a trained agent, but I did have 2 of the best assassins as my parents. Since he didn't see me as a threat, it was child's play to use my free hand to jab into the pressure point behind his ear. As he dropped unconscious to the floor, I managed to snag his gun from its holster, shooting at the other Hydra agents in the room before bolting to the stairs next to the elevator. No time to wait for convenience. And no time to think about the blood that had splattered onto me when I had managed to hit a few of their men with my wild shooting. I could freak out about killing someone later. However, before I could reach the door, another gunshot rang out, and this time it wasn't my own. I felt searing pain slice through my entire being, exploding out from my side and arcing outwards until I couldn't help but drop in agony. I might have been trained to fight, but I wasn't trained to take a bullet. I clutched at my side, moaning silently in pain as I felt my own blood stain my hands and shirt red. I made the mistake of looking down and seeing the red bloom across my shirt in a morbid flower caused a wave of nausea to sweep over me and my vision to darken. Everything became slightly blurry as I began to violently shake. Shock. I was going into shock. "You moron," I heard vaguely. "If you killed her, you're dealing with the boss." He wanted a prisoner, not a corpse. Another wave of tremors swept through me at his words and I closed my eyes, trying to fight the urge to vomit. I felt myself being lifted up off the ground and being moved, but anything else was lost to the fuzzy oncoming of unconsciousness and the roaring sound that seemed to flow through my ears. My head felt like it had been filled with water and detached from my neck. Not able to take the aching pain anymore, I gave myself over to the sweet beckoning of oblivion. I went in and out of consciousness, hearing the sounds of people rushing around me, ordering other people to get this or that. I wanted to shield my eyes from the bright lights above me, but I couldn't seem to move anything. I blinked lazily at the people in white that were running around me frantically, sticking needles in me and demanding I get more blood. I hazily remembered that there had been an attack by Hydra. Had they taken me? Were they trying to save me? Why? Or was I still in the tower, having been left for dead? Yes, that must have been it. I was still in the tower or on the helicarrier, being treated by medical personnel for my bullet wound. From the amount of blood I had apparently lost, I assumed it was a clean shot through me. Relieved to know everything would turn out all right, I slipped back into unconsciousness. I whimpered as I reawakened, this time to dim lighting and a hard floor. My mouth felt like it was full of cotton and my head felt like it was full of clouds. I blinked slowly to get the sleep out of my eyes and glanced around groggily, confused, before the reality of my situation finally hit me. I wasn't home. Hydra really had taken me, they had just needed me alive. The cell I was in could barely pass as a prison cell, it was so small. The walls and flooring were made of plain cement and the only light came from a little window in the iron door that was the only way in and out of my little room. A bucket rested in the corner for if I had to relive myself I assumed. I shuddered at the thought, and that was it. The room was so small, I would have only been able to pace 2, maybe 3 steps before having to turn around again. Not that I would be moving much. Even as I thought it, a dull, throbbing ache made itself known in my side. I looked down to find myself in hospital scrubs and nothing else. They must have changed me. I blushed deeply at the thought of anyone seeing me naked in this god-awful place and could only hope that that was all they did. I wasn't sore down there, so I hoped that my virginity was still intact and that I hadn't been taken advantage of. I lifted the gown slightly to see my side and gasped at the image. It was a kaleidoscope of purples, blues, and greens, bruised and swollen. The exit wound in the front of my side was an angry red around the harsh black stitches. I gingerly felt the backside of my wound, where the bullet had pierced me, and winced as I felt it in the same condition. They may have kept me alive, but they hadn't done a very good job of dressing my wound. I was pretty sure it was already getting infected if the deep red was anything to go by. I very carefully maneuvered my way into a sitting position, unable to hold back and few whimpers of pain. Even that was an effort and by the time I had sat up all the way I was exhausted and sweating. The salt of my sweat stung my wound and the various scratches that were scattered across my body from the explosion of glass. With nothing else to do, I took inventory of my injuries. Besides the obvious, I had scratches of varying depths all down my arms and legs. Looking closer at my feet, I was pretty sure I still had some shards embedded deep in the flesh. I must have gotten them when I was running, barefoot, through the glass minefield, trying to get to the stairs. Not my smartest moment, but it wasn't like I was thinking clearly. I was thinking more along the lines of, holy shit Hydra. I considered trying to take some of the pieces out myself, especially the rather large piece that resided in my heel, but shook my head. Pulling them out without the right materials would cause a lot of unneeded pain and, with my current living conditions, they would probably get infected as well, if they weren't already. Not to mention what the loss of blood would do to me. I already felt disturbingly lightheaded. Suddenly, I heard the distinct creak of a rusty door opening and heavy footsteps. I huddled in the corner, trying to make myself seem as innocent and unassuming as possible. The iron door in front of me swung open and before me stood 3 men. The 2 on the sides were obviously guards and, by the glares they sent my way, had been on the retrieval mission. I must have shot some of their buddies. I held back a satisfied smirk at the thought. I never thought I would be happy about the death of someone at my own hands, but I could make an exception for these Hydra bastards. The man in the center was the leader from before, his harsh glare making my moment of satisfaction dwindle and die under his gaze. "So, you're finally awake." Silence followed his statement as I naturally couldn't answer, but he obviously didn't know that I was mute, because his anger bubbled up at the awkward silence that surrounded us. "Well, aren't you going to say anything? Ask questions? Beg for mercy?" I raised my eyebrows in disbelief at the last suggestion. Like I would ever beg to people have taken my eyebrows as a challenge because I was then jerked up and slammed into the wall, my head bouncing off the concrete painfully. "Listen here you little bitch. I don't know who you are and I really don't care. All we care about is obtaining Captain America and re-obtaining the Winter Soldier. Since you are obviously important to the Avengers, you are going to lead them right to us. If you behave, maybe we won't kill you." He sneered, his hot breath wafting over me. I did the only thing I could think of to answer. I spit directly into his eye. With a snarl he wiped my spit from his face, glowering down at me. "You're going to regret that, bitch," was the last thing I heard before he backhanded me, hard, and I was slammed into the wall and back into unconsciousness once more. The Avengers returned to the tower as fast as possible after Jarvis got word to Tony that their so-called mission had been a decoy and that the tower had been attacked in their absence. They exited the jet, ready for an attack, but were instead faced with 3 distraught women. Pepper, Darcy, and Jane were all shaken and near tears. They all tried to speak at once. They were all speaking so fast that it came out as gibberish to the assembled heroes. Okay. Everyone calm down. What happened here?" Steve tried to salvage the situation, his keen eyes scanning the women's forms, looking for injuries. He found none. But he also found that one woman, the one he and his soulmate had begun to care for very deeply, was missing. Fear gripped his heart. "Where's Angel?" Jane and Pepper just looked at him sadly, eyes wide with guilt. Darcy was that one that finally confirmed his worst fears. "That's what we've been trying to tell you. They took her." Steve swore as Clint and Natasha shoved their way to the front. "What happened? Why was she taken and not the rest of you? Where was she? Did you see it happen?" Clint fired off rapid questions, jaw tight with controlled rage and terror for his daughter. Natasha stood silently by his side, her mouth thinned into a tight, worried line. Tony was frantically trying to calm his partner down as Bruce took deep breaths, trying to withhold the transformation. The Hulk truly liked Angel and was making his displeasure known and, while Bruce was in complete agreement that they needed to get her back safely, he knew that now was not the time for the big guy. Everyone seemed affected by this tragic turn of events. Angel was one of their own and whoever had taken her was going to face the wrath of the Avengers. She must have still been in the commons. We all went down to watch the TV for when you guys would inevitably be bashing up baddies, but she never came down after our performance. All of a sudden Jarvis informed us that there was a breach in the security of the tower and that we were to stay in that location as he secured it. Then, after a few minutes, he told us that Angel had been compromised and that you all were on your way back home. That's all we know. Darcy explained, voice quavering ever so slightly as she relayed the information. She didn't like showing it, but she was just as distraught as Jane, who had broken down in Thor's arms, crying. She was terrified for Angel, her new friend, and didn't like thinking about what could have happened to her. "All right, we need to see the scene to get a clear picture of what happened. Come on," Sam said as he corralled the rest of the people on the roof into the elevator. "Jarvis, take us down to the commons." Tony ordered and Jarvis complied without a word, the elevator smoothly going down and opening with a soft, foreboding ding. Tony immediately turned to Bruce, rubbing his arms in a soothing manner, muttering encouraging words as Bruce tinted green at the sight before them. Everyone else were as varying degrees of rage, shock, and fear for Angel. The room had been completely demolished. Furniture was overturned and glass littered the floor. The huge, gaping hole in the window let the strong wind of New York in, creating an eerie whistling and tinkling sound as it moved the discarded shards on the floor. Then there were the bodies. 3 men in black lay amid the debris. Two of them were obviously dead, both lying face up with unseeing eyes. The other man was still alive, breathing deeply and slowly, unconscious. But it was the blood that caught the Avengers' attention. It started out in the corner, the glass there stained red in different places. But it wasn't just there. Oh no, the blood ran from the corner in crimson footprints, glass broken into smaller pieces where they treaded. They ran from the unconscious man towards the elevator and the stairs. There the footprints were consumed by an alarmingly large pool of blood. The pool had originated more towards the stairs, but had slowly pooled outwards towards the elevator. A bullet was lodged in the wall next to the pool. More footprints, this time in shoes and heavier, obviously a man's, walked from the window to the blood before walking back to the window with blood covering his shoes and more blood dripping from Angel, whom he presumably held, onto the ground before the trail disappeared through the hole and out the window. Silence hung heavy over the Avengers as they took in the scene, each imagining what had happened. God, we should have been here. Bucky choked out, eyes staring unblinkingly at the pool of crimson before him and imagining Angel's body lying there, broken. Steve was in shock, staring at the horrific scene before him and thinking the worst. No one could have survived losing that much blood. Seeing that their leader was too disturbed to do his usual job, Tony took over, still with a comforting arm around Bruce. Okay, Natasha, Clint, Thor, and I will go down to the lab and watch the video footage of what happened to get a better picture of who did this and why. Bucky, Steve, you grab the man that's still alive and bring him down to the Hulk room. Clint and Natasha can interrogate him there. Sam, you take the ladies and Bruce down to your floor and give them some tea of whatever juju it is you use to calm people down. We need everyone to have as level a head as possible. Everyone nodded and began to follow Tony's demands silently. Soon the room was empty save for Steve and Bucky, who both felt lost. We should have been here, Bucky said again, quieter this time. She couldn't have survived that. That's too much blood for one person to lose. Steve whispered brokenly. His eyes welled with unwelcome tears as Bucky came to stand in front of him, cutting off his view of Angel's blood. Our girl is strong, Steve. She could survive anything she puts her mind to. Now we're going to grab this son of a bitch and find out where they took Angel, and then we're going to get her back. You hear me? And when we get her back, we're going to finally tell her how we feel about her so that we don't ever have to lose her again, understand? I don't care if we all aren't soulmates, she's our girl. You know it, I know it, hell, I'm pretty sure she even knows it. We're going to find her, alive and well. Okay, punk? Bucky slapped Steve's cheek, bringing him out of his depressed daze and snapping him back to reality. He straightened and his eyes hardened, determination radiating off of him. All right. Bucky nodded in approval and began to move towards the man that still breathed. Steve began to pick his way through the glass to help, but stopped when a flash of white caught his attention. He looked over to see Angel's pad of paper lying forgotten, among the chaos. He made his way over to it, brushing some pieces of glass off of the blood-splattered paper. Steve picked it up almost reverently. However, he froze when he saw the words that were printed on it, somehow unscathed by the spots of blood. The words on the page stared out at him, the confession that Angel had never gotten around to telling them. Steve, what's wrong? He heard distantly, as though Bucky were far away. You were right, Steve murmured, almost too quiet for Bucky to pick up, even with his enhanced hearing capabilities. What? Bucky approached Steve slowly, having left the man propped up outside the elevator to be taken down to the Hulk room. You were right. She knew. Knew what? Bucky asked slowly, confused. Knew she was ours. What do you mean? Steve wordlessly handed Bucky the notepad, allowing him to read Angel's message. I'm your third soulmate. The Avengers were in a tizzy in Tony's lab after watching the video of Angel's abduction. Clint and Natasha were torn between being proud that their daughter had taken out 3 men and concerned about her gunshot wound and glass cuts. She had lost a lot of blood. Tony was in his element, tracking any technological bursts that had happened anywhere in the world, trying to pinpoint the area where they had remotely shut down Jarvis temporarily. Tony was sure they had done it remotely. He had checked and had seen no internal damage to the tower. Although that fact calmed the guilt that weighed on him, Tony still felt that it was his fault that the security wasn't as good as it should have been. Tony had seen how close Angel had grown to Bruce and had thus included her in the small amount of people he cared for his family. Now, due to something that was frustratingly out of the genius' control, Angel was gone and the entire team was frantic with worry. Even the normally jovial Thor was grim and silent as Tony did his computer work. I have some high levels of tech bursts in the Washington area, possibly bridging into Canada. I doubt Hydra brought her out of the US if they wanted her to live. The thought that they might not want her to survive hung, foreboding, over their heads, but Tony cleared his throat and forged ahead. They'd had to have stopped to give her a blood transfusion somewhere before heading off all the way to Washington. So, if Washington is our place, they might not have arrived yet. Do we have any way to track her? No, Clint said, voice tinged in regret, but Natasha approached Tony and he smiled knowingly. Now, I'm sure a smart woman like you wouldn't let your little girl go out with the big, bad super soldiers in big, bad New York without a tracking device. There's a tracking chip in the bracelet she always wears. She was definitely wearing it today, so we should be able to track her. Move over. Tony grudgingly gave his seat up to Natasha and her fingers flew over the keyboard. Clint watched in relief. At least one of them had had the foresight to bug Angel. It seems the tracking device is located somewhere in the Michigan area, but I am unable to narrow the search down further. Jarvis announced after a few agonizing seconds. The group let out a collective sigh of disappointment. I can get us within 7 miles of the tech burst that probably shut Jarvis down. But, as much as I hate to say it, I think we need to try there to get information first. The entire state of Michigan is a big area to work with, Tony said. You're right, Steve stated as he strode into the room with Bucky, radiating his Captain America determination. The man is in the Hulk room ready for you, Tasha. Get in there and try to find out any further information before we suit up, he ordered, coming up behind the red-headed assassin and watching the softly blinking red area that indicated where his angel was located. Natasha looked at the two soldiers intently, noting the way they were as tense as one of Clint's bowstrings. You know, don't you? She asked quietly. She was trying to tell us before we left. I found her notepad, Steve responded. Good. It's about time. I just wish you could have found out under better circumstances, Natasha said as she and Clint left the room to question the Hydra agent. What does the widow speak of? Thor asked, confused. Angel's our soulmate, Bucky said in a clipped tone, wanting to get out of there and find their girl as quickly as possible. Thor brightened at the news while Tony smirked. He had figured it out a long time ago, with the way the three always acted around each other. Being a genius had its perks, but, as it was Angel's choice to remain quiet, in a manner of speaking, he, for once, didn't interfere. Soulmates weren't something you messed with, and even the great Tony Stark understood that. It is a well-made match. You two are worthy warriors for the fair Angel, Thor boomed, glad to have at least some happy news, and clapped them both on the shoulder. Thanks, Thor. But, right now, we just want to find her, not celebrate. No offense. Bucky ground out in the face of Thor's big smile. That sobered the big man immediately, his frown returning. Go ahead and suit up. As soon as Natasha and Clint are done with the Hydra agent, then we're out of here. We'll meet you on the jet, Steve said and turned with Bucky to leave the room. Cap, he turned to glance back at Tony, who looked uncharacteristically serious. Yes, we'll get her back. They wouldn't have stopped in Michigan if she was dead. Besides, you would feel it if she were, you know. We're going to find your girl. Steve gave the older man a strained, wan smile. Thanks. Get up. I moaned quietly as I was roused from the sweet darkness of my head. I looked up blearily to find the same man that had knocked me out. Had I been out for a couple of minutes? A few hours? Leering down at me. He grabbed my arm and roughly jerked me up from the floor, and I felt several stitches in my side tear at the treatment. I cried out silently and he looked at me funny before chuckling, a low, evil sound. Oh, I get it. You're a mute. Oh, this is great. The Avengers are playing with retards now. I glared at the man, wishing I had the powers to shoot lasers out of my eyes. Just because I was mute did not mean I was mentally handicapped. Guess you couldn't answer me earlier even if you had wanted to. Huh? His face darkened. But that didn't give you the right to spit at me, you little brat. I'm still going to make you regret that, don't think I've forgotten. My eyes widened in fear and pain as he dragged me out of the cell. Hey, boss, since she's a mute, do you think we could have some fun with her? It's not like she could scream for help. One of the guards suddenly groped my ass and I jerked forward out of his grip, sending him a dirty glare over my shoulder. He simply laughed. Feisty. I like him feisty. I swallowed back bile as he licked his lips, looking me over like I was a piece of meat. No, we're keeping her alive, and with the condition she's in now, you'd break her. We all know you're anything but gentle with your conquests. The man laughed at the leader's words and nodded in agreement. Yeah, you're right. She couldn't handle me. He went to grab at my ass again and I used my free hand to smack his away, much to his amusement. Now kitten. Revulsion made me shudder and I had to stop myself from trying to make a break for it. I knew I wouldn't get far, and I also knew that the Avengers would come for me. They had to. In case you were wondering, we're moving you. We don't want to stay in one location for too long. Don't want your little friends to catch up to us before we want them to. The leader said conversationally as he continued to drag me, stumbling down the hall. I couldn't understand why they thought this would work. Why they thought that luring in the Avengers was a good idea. The boss must have seen the doubt on my face because he shoved me up against the wall again, his gross breath fanning across my face as he spoke. You think we're stupid to lead the Avengers to us? Well, you're wrong. Since it's not like you can tell anyone, I'll go ahead and inform you. Let it sink in that you're going to die. We've come up with a solution that will drive your friend the Hulk crazy. And how are the Avengers going to fight us when they'll be too busy with the rampaging beast? We just need to make sure the serum stays in. In the chaos, we'll simply re-obtain and reprogram the Winter Soldier. We can snag Captain America later. The Solider can take care of him once he's back online. He smiled and I felt sick to my stomach. They couldn't do that to Bucky again. He had confided in me how much his assassin days still haunted him and how the memories that had slowly crept back into his mind gave him severe nightmares. He would never forgive himself if he had to go back to that life. And, God, Bruce would never forgive himself either if someone got hurt because of his alter ego. I struggled her into the wall, my cuts and sides screaming in pain. Jerry says that the plane is ready, boss. The guard said from behind the man. He smirked and pulled away from me. Fine. Come on, bitch. Time to go to your new, and last, home. From there, we'll contact the Avengers and get what we need. Ms. Barton's tacking device is moving. Jarvis informed them all from the jet that the Avengers had just gotten up into the air. In which direction, Jay? Towards the west. Jarvis replied. The Avengers all gave each other pointed looks. After a little persuasion on the part of the assassins, the Hydra agent had sung like a canary, telling them that they would most likely take Angel to their base in the woods of Washington. Towards Washington. We had to get there first. Clint, Natasha, full speed. We need to be there to get our Angel back. Steve barked out. While the other members of the team shared quiet smiles at Steve's claim on Angel, they immediately followed his orders, heading at full speed towards Washington. And, hopefully, towards Angel. MORSECODE. Adding a new one for this chapter. This has to be the place. There's no other building for miles. Tony whispered as the Avengers team hid on the outskirts of a thick wood, having had to stop the jet at an airport and complete the trek on foot when the trees got too thick for a car. The others nodded at his assessment. Does the tracker say that Angel's here yet? Before Tony could answer, they all heard the unmistakable sound of a plane nearing the area. They hunkered down and prayed that they couldn't be seen through the thick foliage. She's here now. Tony snarked as the very small plane managed to land in a small clearing that the Avengers jet would never had fit on. They all watched as a male got out, dragging a reluctant, stumbling female. Angel. Bucky and Steve whimpered at the same time, the heartbreak in the voices getting to the other members of the team. They needed to get Angel back, if only for Bucky and Steve's sanity. After a few hours on an extremely cramped plane, we finally arrived at what the leader had called my new and last home. Trees surrounded the area and the clouds above were dark and menacing, just like the building itself. Definitely not subtle. A big, black building in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. Come on now. You have a date with a video camera. Ignoring my confusion, he dragged me out of the plane and across the clearing. As we entered, I thought of trying to escape before we entered the maze of hallways, but then I realized that I would just as easily get lost in the thick trees and discarded the idea. I just had to wait for the Avengers and hope they didn't play right into HYDRA's hands. After several twists and turns that had my head spinning, we arrived as a room with an unassuming little black door. With a smirk, the man that had been my constant tormentor since I had woken up in Hydra's hands opened the door and unceremoniously threw me in. He shut the door with a resounding click as it locked, and I found myself in complete darkness. Before my eyes could adjust to the inky blackness, light blinded me as a spotlight aimed directly at me turned on. I raised my hand to cover my eyes, forgetting about my bad side and wincing as the few stitches left were tugged at. My hospital gown had long since been stained a disgusting mixture of brown and red as the blood dried and more replaced it. I noticed a video camera in the corner that was trained on me, and a feeling of dread filled me. I watched in numbed horror as the light flickered to life and the camera whirred to show it was working. After staring at the camera for a little while, I heard a distinct hum begin to thrum throughout the entire room and I started shaking, fear spiking through me. What were they planning? A voice suddenly came out of somewhere in the room, some hidden speaker, but I realized very quickly that I was not the target audience and my foreboding grew to new heights. Avengers. You think you are so powerful? How powerful are you that we so easily took one of your own? Let's see how powerful you feel when we electrocute your little friend to death. Slowly, painfully, and you will only be able to watch her suffer. With that the humming grew louder and electricity arced through the room and shot through me. I instantly dropped to the floor in agony. I screamed silently, jerking and shaking as the voltage speared through me. I willed it to stop and mentally cried out for help, from the Avengers, from my parents, from my soulmates. If only I had told them, before I had to die here. We just got a live video feed from Hydra. Should I open it? Tony asked quietly, interrupting the other Avengers who had been planning their attack. Yes. Tell us what they're up to. Sam replied, glancing at his friends around him. They all nodded in agreement, though they were all worried as to what the video would hold. Alrighty then. Jay, play the video. While no one but Tony could see the video, his heavy cursing and clenching of fists were enough of an indication that something was terribly wrong. Tony, Bruce asked worriedly, we need to get in there, now? Why? What's going on? Bucky asked, panicked. The millions of ways Hydra had tortured him over the years flashed through his head and he grimaced at the thought of Angel having to endure even one of them. She was too sweet, too pure to have to go through the horror that he had been through. Their electrocut was all Tony managed to spit out before the two soldiers bolted towards the building, abandoning the half-made plan in favor of just getting their Angel back before she was killed. The only thoughts in their minds were, find, save, protect Angel. Well, so much for the man with a plan. Tony sighed as he soared up in his suit, firing a blast at the doors to give the soldiers instant access to the building. Hulk smash was heard and Tony winced as his soulmate completed his transformation. No, big guy. Not yet. Tony flew in front of the Hulk's face, trying to distract him. He should have known that Bruce wouldn't have been able to hold in his anger at the news with how close he was the Angel. Mate move. Hulk smash. The Hulk grunted out as his mate hovered in front of him. He didn't want to swat him away, for fear of hurting his smaller mate, but he liked the tiny Angel girl. His puny self liked the tiny Angel girl too. He wanted to help her. Hulk can smash in a little bit. First, Cap and Buckaroo had to get Angel out of there. The Hulk looked at Tony, slightly confused. Starman and Metal Arm find tiny Angel girl. Tony had to smile at the worry he heard in the Hulk's voice, and Bruce thought he was just a mindless beast. Yes, Starman and Metal Arm will find Angel and then you can smash to your heart's content, big guy. The Hulk gave his mate a vicious grin at that, anticipation running through his green veins. Meanwhile, Steve and Bucky had barged their way into the facility, guns and shield blazing. Hydra goons dropped left and right under their furious attack. Sam and Thor backed them up while Clint and Natasha made a beeline towards the control room, hoping to direct the soldiers to where Angel was from there. Okay, go left, left, right, straight, right, and then left and she should be in the room on your right. Natasha directed through their comms. Clint was too horrified at witnessing Angel being electrocuted in one of the security videos that he couldn't add anything. Natasha herself had to swallow down bile at seeing her daughter tortured in this way. There would be hell to pay as soon as Angel was safe. What worried her the most was that Angel's spasms were beginning to grow so harsh that they ran together, indicating that whoever was in control of the electricity in the room was upping the voltage. Got it. Steve and Bucky followed the directions without hesitation, intent on finding Angel, with Sam and Thor following close behind. The two soldiers barely even noticed the men they were killing. They had simply become obstacles in the way of finding their soulmate. They ran on autopilot, not pausing once. When they finally reached the room Angel was being tortured in, Bucky used his metal arm to simply rip it off its hinges. Before them lay their Angel, writhing in pain as electricity continued to course through her body. "Friend, I can go through without being harmed." Perhaps, before Thor could finish his sentence, Steve had already thrown himself into the room, the electricity that was incapacitating Angel merely stalling him. He dragged himself through the pain and carefully lifted Angel's shuddering body into his arms before making his way back out into the hallway. "Or you can do it that way," Sam muttered as Steve nearly collapsed against the wall, yet being careful not to jostle his precious cargo. "I had to get her out of there," Steve panted, looking down as the still slightly twitching Angel. "How is she?" Bucky asked quietly, concern marring his features as he crouched down next to his soulmates. How easily he had taken to thinkite. "I don't know. She stopped jerking at least, but that was a lot of electricity for one person to take. It even threw me for a loop at first." Damn. Bucky knew that it took a lot to knock one of them down, and the fact that it had affected Steve meant that there had been a lot of electricity flowing in that room and into Angel. As if knowing that they were talking about her, Angel's eyes fluttered open. "Was I dead? No, I was in pain." "You wouldn't feel pain if you were dead. Would you?" "Maybe I was in hell. But why? What had I done?" My skin felt too hot and tight over me and I wanted to scream out as I felt my body twitch. My nerves felt like they were on fire. No, I was definitely alive. And there were people, I could hear people. I strained my ears to try to pick up what was being said but it sounded far away and hazy. I only managed to catch the last part. "Threw me for a loop at first. Steve." That was Steve's voice. He had come to rescue me. But if Steve was here, oh, please no, please let this have been a covert mission with just Steve, Natasha, and Clint. What if Bruce and Bucky were here? Damn. Oh no, Bucky. If he was here then I was sure everyone was here, including Bruce. Ignoring the protests of my body that pled for me to just slip back into oblivion, I slowly managed to force my eyes open. My hazel ones immediately locked with gray and blue as my super soldiers looked down at me in relief. "Thank God you're okay, doll. We were so worried," Bucky whispered, brushing back some of the hair that was plastered to my face from sweat. I tried to move my arms to raise my hands but my limbs weren't cooperating the way I wanted them to. My hands simply twitched and I frowned. "Take it easy, sweetheart. We're going to get you out of here and to medical. Don't try to move." I tried to shake my head, conveying that what I had to say couldn't wait but couldn't hold in a silent moan as I did. "Sweetheart, you need to stop." I took a deep breath and tried to think through the pain. "Guys, I think she's trying to tell us something," Sam piped up, watching intently as I tried to move my hands again. I nodded my head, swallowing back another gasp of pain at the simple movement. "Well, none of us understand sign language and I'm fresh out of paper. We will just need to wait until we get to someone who can understand her." Bucky growled. "Right now I just want her out of this building and safe at home." I used all of my effort to move my arm enough that I could grab Bucky's hand. He looked down at me in surprise as I gave him a small frown of disapproval. "Well, we can't understand you, doll. How are you going to communicate with us? Is this really that important? You need medical attention?" I looked at the hand I held thoughtfully and an idea formed. I had grabbed his metal hand, my nails clinking when they had hit against the cool steel. I began tapping rapidly at it and then waited, praying they understood. "Is that Morse code?" Steve questioned, looking down at me with a new respect. I nodded, relieved. "Okay, Buck and I know Morse, go ahead." "HYDRAWANTSSOLDIER." Bucky snorted at what I messaged them, causing Thor and Sam to look at him strangely, neither of them knowing Morse code. "That's old news, doll. They've wanted me back for a while. They won't ever get me back, and even if they did I'd have Stevie and you to bring me back." I paused as he added me into the equation, but my brain was too tired and fried to try to think any harder than I already was. HAVESERUMMAKEHULKCRA Steve and Bucky looked at each other in alarm. We have to warn Stark to get Banner out of here before. Steve was cut off when an angry roar echoed down the halls. I had been too late. The Hulk had been unleashed upon his teammates, and from the sound of his thundering footsteps, he was headed right for us. MORSECODE. Steve scrambled up and took off with Bucky, Sam, and Thor following closely behind him. What's going on, man? Why was the Hulk let loose before we got out? Sam shouted over the destruction the Hulk was reaping on the building we were currently still in. Hydra apparently developed a formula that can make the Hulk go crazy. That's what Angel was trying to warn us about. We need to get out of here. Natasha, where's the nearest exit? Steve spoke the last part into the comms, listening to whatever Tasha said on the other end before making a sharp left. Thor, you've fought him before. Can you go back and help stall him so we can have a little extra time to get out of here? If we stay here much longer, the building's going to collapse on us. I will do what I can. Take care. The Thunder God announced before he disappeared down a different hallway towards the Hulk. Plaster and debris rained down from the ceiling as we ran. Well, as they ran and Steve carried me. My body was still in agony, but I continued to fight to keep my eyes open. I wanted to make sure Bucky, Steve, and the rest of the Avengers got out of this alive. I wouldn't be able to handle it if one of them lost their lives on a mission to save me. We finally managed to make it out of the crumbling facility and into the open air. I tried to shield my eyes from the onslaught of sun but just ended up pulling my stitches again and adding to my plight. Steve looked down briefly in sympathy as he felt me jerk from the pain. Our little group made it to the tree line, hiding amongst the tall trunks and greenery. I turned my head slightly and I could see the Hulk smashing the place to smithereens, with Thor and Tony buzzing around his head like flies, trying to stop him. We're out. So are Natasha and Clint. Let the Hulk take care of the building. We can think of how to get him back to normal after we regroup. Steve ordered, and in response Iron Man and Thor retreated from the Hulk's massive form and towards us. They touched down and Tony immediately put up his face mask. What the fucking hell? Some guy comes up and manages to stick the Hulk with a needle and he goes berserk. He even tried attacking me. And his eyes are red now. What the hell is going on? He shouted, his eyes revealing his intense agitation and worry even though his voice only conveyed anger. Angel said Hydra made some sort of serum that can drive the Hulk crazy. Looks like it works, Bucky said grimly. Well, is there any way to reverse this? I like my mate big and green, not red and mean, Tony snapped. Bucky looked towards me. Doll, did they say anything else about it? I shook my head in the negative, giving Tony a small, apologetic smile. He sighed, but gave me a weak smile back. Glad to see you alive and well, kid. We thought Cap and the Tin Man were going to lose it when you were taken. Try not to let it happen again, okay? With that his features hardened and he turned back to the group as a whole. I think we can wear it out of his system. The Hulk has a fast metabolism, so if we can get him to burn through whatever serum this is, he should go back to normal. Natasha, Clint, glad you could finally join us. The two spies came through the trees, beelining towards where I was still cradled in Steve's massive arms. Clint was about to hug me, but Natasha held him back, giving him a stern look. I was confused and she must have seen it because she tried to gently explain the situation to me. Angel, you're severely burned from the electrocution. I was? I felt the heat on my skin but I didn't feel it was bad enough to be a burn. I think adrenaline and shock might be making it so you can't feel it, but Clint doesn't need to aggravate your condition. Besides, we have a bigger problem to deal with before we can get you out of here completely. So the plan is to wear him down? Unless something else comes up. Steve, will you stay behind and look over Angel while the rest of us try to get the Hulk? Steve nodded and Bucky seemed about to stay behind too but, with a glare from Tony, stayed quiet. Alright, try not to hurt him too bad. Remember, he's under the influence and we are just trying to burn out the serum. So no kill shots. I don't care if Bruce thinks he's indestructible, I'm not going to test it. Let's go. With that, all the Avengers save Steve went out onto the battlefield against one of their own. I looked worriedly at Bucky, remembering how the man had wanted him to be reprogrammed. I knew that since they were planning on the Hulk going crazy, Most of the Hydra agents would not have been inside the building. They would be elsewhere and waiting to strike. Sure enough, Bucky was soon surrounded by Hydra goons. Panicked, I turned to Steve to see him watching the battle with worry as well. I waved my hand in front of his face to get his attention before I began tapping on his shield. "Geo." Steve frowned down at me. "No, I have to stay here and keep you safe." I wanted to growl with irritation. Didn't he see Bucky struggling with the sheer number of Hydra agents? The others were too busy with the Hulk to help him. "GOHELPBUCKY." Steve looked about to deny me again, but I kept going. HYDRAWILLREPROGRAFFORGIVEFORGIEFIFHEGTSTAKENILBEFINEPLEASE. Steve hesitated, but I knew he was on the fence. On one hand, he wanted to make sure nothing happened to me, but on the other he could see Bucky needed assistance. "If you're sure you'll be fine. I'll help him and then be right back, okay?" BESAFE. I tapped and he gave me a gentle smile before leaving a lingering kiss on my forehead. "I will as long as you will." He took off towards the swarm of Hydra agents that I could tell were shooting Bucky with a lot of tranquilizer darts. He was faltering as more and more of them hit their mark and made their way into his system. Steve came just in time, flinging his shield and knocking out 2 men at once before getting into the thick of them to help Bucky, who was in the center. As I watched the 2 battles going on, one around Bucky and one around the Hulk, I felt a niggling in the back of my mind. Something important, a detail I had forgotten. I frowned as I sifted through my memories trying to figure out what was so important that it could draw my attention from making sure my family and soulmates were safe. Finally, my brain landed on my memory of the man in black outlining his plan to me. What had he said? "We just need to make sure the serum stays in." What did he mean by that? Once it was in his bloodstream, how would it leave? Unless the serum was so fast-acting that a constant supply would need to be injected into the Hulk. Maybe just a small amount each time, but if the stream was constant, then the Hulk wouldn't burn off the serum like Tony was hoping and would keep going insane with rage. Tony had mentioned a needle. That meant the needle was still lodged in the Hulk somewhere, probably somewhere on his leg or arm. I squinted, trying to see if the Hulk had anything sticking out of him and, just as I predicted, I saw a glint of something metal attached to his right hand. Without a comm and without a voice, I had no way of telling everyone what I had discovered. I had to do something. I looked down at myself and winced. The parts of me that were showing were a disgusting array of red and black where charred skin met muscle tissue. My hospital gown was covered in blood and I was surprised that I hadn't passed out from the loss. So, one side of me was swollen and infected with a gunshot wound while the other was constantly weeping fluids from my destroyed skin, as I had fallen onto my good side in the electrocution room. But I could barely feel either one. I was so numb. Sure, pain shot through me when I moved, but I could grin and bear it, right? This was important. I gritted my teeth and began trying to pull myself up off the ground, letting out silent groans, moans, and whimpers as I moved. I just kept telling myself, Bruce, for Bucky, for Steve. For my family. I finally managed to drag myself up off the ground, my entire body screaming in protest. I leaned against a tree, ignoring the feeling of the rough bark tearing into my already destroyed skin. I stood there, swaying slightly and panting as the battles raged on. Doubts began to creep into my mind as I took in the situation. I was supposed to enter the battles as wounded as I was to try to tell someone, anyone, of my theory without being captured again and without passing out or dying. I watched as Iron Man was tossed into the tree line by his own mate and I hardened my resolve. If Tony could face his own mate in battle, a mate that just so happened to be the Hulk, I could do this. It was just one step after another, right? I slowly made my way away from my resting place, remembering as I walked about the glass that was lodged in my feet. Each step I took seemed to force them deeper into my soles and heels, but I grit my teeth and kept hobbling along. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally made it to the edge of the forest. In front of me was the big clearing, on the left, the battle with the Hulk, or the right, the battle for Bucky. Knowing my best chance was to find Natasha or Clint on the ground instead of trying to get through the mass of Hydra agents that still swarmed my soulmates, I headed towards the left. I felt awkward and exposed, stumbling out into the clearing alone as the battles raged on, but I didn't really have a choice. As I got closer and closer to the Hulk, my fear ratcheted up a notch at seeing his huge form. This wasn't Bruce. This wasn't even the Hulk. This was something Hydra had created. Angel! I heard and turned slightly to see Steve's eyes wide with horror at seeing me out of my hiding spot. I gave him an apologetic grimace before continuing on my trek, determined to complete my self-given mission. I knew he couldn't get to me with the amount of Hydra agents attacking him. After a couple more minutes, I finally made it to the outskirts of the destroyed building. I collapsed on a piece of rubble in exhaustion, my sweat making my wounds sting harshly. I heard the Hulk roar and I shuddered. It was so much scarier when it was up close and personal. Angel, what the fuck do you think you're doing? I looked over to find Clint glaring at me from his strategic place behind what was left of a wall, bow notched and ready to shoot at the Hulk again. I raised my hands, ready to sign, when he interrupted me. It doesn't matter. You're marching your ass right back into the woods. You hear me? This is no place for you when you're so injured. Come on. I'll provide you back up. Then you're staying put. He grabbed my wrist gently, albeit firmly, and began dragging me back the way I had so laboriously came. I shook myself free and glared at him before managing to get my fingers to sign. Tapping was much easier than signing, it seemed. No, I came out here to tell you that I know how to stop the Hulk. What? How? The needle in his hand is constantly injecting him with the serum. You need to remove it before he can come back to himself. Clint looked at me thoughtfully. How did you figure it out? Does it really matter, Clint? Just get the needle out of his hand. Clint looked ready to retort when his eyes widened and a huge shadow blocked out the sun-hot air wafted past my hair, and I slowly turned to see the Hulk right there in front of us. Drool trailed down his mouth and his eyes were indeed red, rolling in with an insane haze to them. He looked like a demented, green demon. Hulk kill! He bellowed before he reached down with both meaty hands and picked Clint and I up with a crushing grip. Clint had tried to shoot him, but that had just made him angrier, squeezing both of us so much that we both cried out as ribs cracked. He grinned maliciously as he felt the bones snap under his fingers. I tugged at his fingers desperately, trying to get him to loosen and to give me oxygen. No, Thor and Tony shouted at him, trying to distract him from squeezing us to death, but it seemed he was determined to crush us. My vision darkened with the lack of air. I barely noticed the glint of metal for what it was. The needle. I stared at the needle filled with a vicious red fluid almost in disbelief before I sluggishly reached out and yanked it out of his hand. Immediately, the Hulk, howling in pain, dropped us onto the hard ground, my head slamming into it unforgivingly. My body finally giving out under the stress and pain. The last thing I heard was a big, yet innocent voice whimper. Tiny angel girl. A severe infection in the gunshot wound on my right side. Extensive third-degree burns on my left. Deep puncture wounds in both feet. 5 broken ribs. Moderate internal bleeding. A concussion. And those were just the physical injuries. Following the trauma of that day, God, was it only a day? I developed depression and anxiety. I was jumpy all the time and even started avoiding windows for fear that another attack would happen. Not to mention the severe nightmares that plagued me every night, causing me to wake up screaming and covered in sweat. I knew I was suffering from PTSD, but I refused to talk to a therapist, despite most of the Avengers encouraging it. Tony was the only one who didn't push me. He seemed to understand the need to deal with things internally. Everyone worrying about me was just suffocating, so I took to hiding in my room, even going so far as to have meals brought to my door. When I actually felt like eating, that is. I knew my behavior was just worrying them all even more, but I just needed to deal with things in my own way. Not even Steve and Bucky were immune to my avoidance. They had tried more than anyone to try to get me to come out of my room. Bucky even threatening once to break the door down, but I stood firm. I wanted to be left alone, and seeing them without being with them would just make my situation worse. I hadn't spoken to them at all since my return to the tower after some intense weeks of physical therapy on the helicarrier. I began to lose alarming amounts of weight, my body growing sharp with my lack of fat and muscle, and I felt like I could just blow away with the next gust of wind. My hair grew dry and brittle. My skin seemed to be dying around me, looking white and pallid. Even my eyes looked dead when I dredged up the energy to get myself out of bed and caught a glimpse in the mirror. It wasn't that I blamed the Avengers for my capture and was avoiding them. No, I just didn't want them to see me like this. I was falling apart when they all had faced so much worse than me and were still fighting. Every time I winced at a scar I saw on my body, I reminded myself that Natasha, Clint, hell, even Tony, had 3 to my 1. Every time I saw the fresh skin that had eventually grown to cover the burnt, I thought of how much torture Bucky had gone through and how he had made it out and kept going. I felt pathetic and useless. I knew I needed to get help. I knew I was killing myself, slowly but surely. But I was too ashamed to approach anyone about it. I had dug myself into this hole and I had no idea how to get myself out of it. I thought about talking to Steve and Bucky about it, but I just couldn't let on how weak I was to my super strong soulmates, even if they still didn't know what they were to me. What would they think if they saw me like this? They would probably be disgusted with me. After a couple of weeks of me doing this though, Steve and Bucky had finally had enough. I heard the distinct click of my door unlocking and then 2 pairs of footsteps heading towards my bedroom, where I had been lying, motionless for the past 2 days. I had known this was coming, and was honestly surprised that it had taken them this long. I heard a knock on my bedroom door before Steve spoke up. "Angel, we know you're in there. Buck and I are worried about you. Please come out. I don't want to have to invade the privacy of your room, but we're at the point that we will. We're desperate here." I felt tears well up in my eyes at the concern he displayed. I didn't deserve it. I moved my hand sluggishly, signing to Jarvis slowly what I wanted him to tell them. "Ms. Barton would like me to inform you that she is fine and that she would like to be left alone. However, having witnessed PTSD through Sir, I suggest you ignore her request and enter." I gave my best glare up at the ceiling. The traitor. PTSD, Jesus, I didn't realize it was that bad. I heard Bucky whisper from outside my door, probably thinking I couldn't hear him. "We should have figured though, she went through a lot." Steve responded just as quietly before speaking up and addressing me. "Sweetheart, we'd really like it if you answered the door, but if you don't we will come in." I groaned into my pillow and tried to drag myself up out of bed, but my limbs weren't cooperating. I hadn't eaten in days and I could definitely feel it now that I was trying to move. I collapsed back onto the bed, not even having made it part of the way up. Before I could try to sign something, Jarvis responded for me. "Ms. Barton is unable to get up. I suggest, Captain Rogers, that you enter." "Unable to? Okay, we're coming in," Bucky exclaimed before my door was shoved open. I curled up into a little ball as deathly quiet surrounded the 3 of us as they took in my state. I knew how awful I must look. "Oh sweetheart," I heard Steve murmur. I curled up tighter, wishing I could disappear, tears streaming down my cheeks. I felt the bed shift on both sides of me and then I was gently being lifted into Steve's lap. He cradled me to him as Bucky wiped away my tears with the thick pad of his thumb. "Shush doll. It's all right. You'll be okay, we're here. We're not going to leave you." I heard him whisper as he moved his hands to smooth up and down my arms. I let it all out then, terrible sobs being ripped from my throat as I buried my face into the crook of Steve's shoulder and neck. Steve was silent as he held me, letting Bucky do all the reassurances and letting all of my turbulent emotions that I had bottled up escape all at once. My tears soaked his shirt, but he just held me, allowing me to slowly calm down as I breathed in his scent. I don't know how long we remained like this. Me in Steve's lap and Bucky lying next to us, caressing any piece of me he could reach to calm me down. It felt so intimate that I almost began crying again in want of what I could never have. After my sobs had died down to the occasional sniffle and hiccup, Steve finally spoke, his words as gentle as his arms around my waist. "Angel, why didn't you tell anyone it was getting this bad? We would have helped you." I shook my head and buried my face deeper into Steve's shirt before signing without looking. "Ms. Barton says that she didn't want anyone to worry about her." Bucky sat up, and I could feel him looking down on me. "Angel, that's crazy. All of us have been worried about you anyway, and none of us are strangers to PTSD." I looked down in shame, my matted hair covering my flaming face. Of course he was right. I felt his finger under my chin and I looked up to meet his soft eyes. "We could have helped you. We still can, if you'll let us. Steve and I have been going crazy with worry for you, doll." I averted my eyes and signed again. "She says she's sorry." Jarvis translated immediately. Bucky's eyes suddenly filled with anger and I flinched back into Steve's chest. "You're not forgiven, Buck. No, she should have let us in. Now look at her. This all could have been avoided if she had just talked to us, Bucky growled before jumping off my bed and pacing around my room. For the first time in weeks I felt something other than my sadness and fear. Anger. I carefully lifted my upper body off of Steve and began signing, glaring at Bucky with all the energy I could muster. Ms. Barton asks. Why do you care? Why do you care so much about a stupid little mute girl? Maybe if you just stopped caring then this wouldn't be an issue. Bucky froze before turning to me with an unreadable look on his face. He sat back down on the side of the bed, glancing at Steve. They seemed to have a silent conversation before Steve shifted me out of his lap and back onto the bed, so I could see both of them. You're not stupid, doll. I'm sorry for getting angry, it's just. Angel, we know. Steve said quietly, causing me to furrow my brows in confusion. Knew what? He sighed with an indulgent smile before answering my unasked question. We know that we, all three of us, are soulmates. I sat there, mouth hanging open as I tried to process this. They knew? How long had they known? How had they figured it out? Or who had told them? Why? Were they angry that I had kept it from them? Disappointed? And, more importantly, what did they think of me being their soulmate? As I wrestled with these thoughts in my head, Steve spoke again. We found out just after you were taken. I found your notepad. He reached over to the bedside table and I saw he had brought it with him, with my blood-splattered confession still on the first page. The blood had dried into a dirty brown, but I still shuddered thinking of that day. Who was to say that this was my blood? I took the notepad and ripped the page I had written on out, along with the page under it for good measure. They seemed to understand that I didn't like the sight of the blood and quickly put the papers behind them, out of view. But they didn't throw them away. They were probably wanting to keep them for some odd, sentimental reason, gory as it was. Bucky magically obtained a pen from somewhere and gave it to me, giving me a small smile. I just stared at them blankly. I didn't understand. Why weren't they yelling at me? Or chiding me? Or anything? Doll? You going to say anything? Well, write anything. Usually Bucky's strange brand of humor made me giggle, but not this time. I just looked back and forth between the super soldiers, as if waiting for a bomb to go off. After a few more seconds of awkward silence they sighed deeply. Sweetheart, for this to work, you kind of need to respond. I blinked owlishly at them before putting the pen to the paper. I'm not sure what you want me to say. I heard them breathe out sighs of relief as I finally started to communicate with them. How about an explanation? Why didn't you tell us, sweetheart? Steve's sweet, earnest expression made me squirm. Why was he being so nice? I just couldn't understand it. It's really not that complicated. I hedged. Bucky shook his head. Well, enlighten us, because it's sure as hell complicated to us. Steve nodded in agreement to Bucky's words and I chewed on my lower lip, pondering what I was going to write. For a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of my pen scraping against the paper as I tried my best to explain my reasoning. You already had each other. I was just this intruder, and you didn't even know you were part of a triad. You didn't need me, you were already so perfect together. Clint and Tasha wanted me to tell you, but I wanted to wait until I knew you better, that way I would know if it would even work out between us if I told you. Then after spending so much time together, I realized that I was kind of falling in love with you too. I was going to tell you the night of the concert, but then you got called away for the mission and it was immediately your first priority. You completely forgot about me, and I just assumed it was because I obviously wasn't important enough in your minds. That kind of settled that I wasn't going to tell you, but it seems you found out anyway. I'm sorry if this makes it awkward for you, and I understand if you don't want to be around me anymore. I don't want to make your relationship hard or anything. After I finished off the last word, I simply handed the pad of paper off to Steve and let him read with Bucky doing the same over his shoulder. I continued biting my lips nervously, fidgeting with my fingers as I waited for their response. I didn't want them to stop being my friends. I would miss them too much, but I also didn't want to intrude on their established relationship. I knew if they rejected me I would probably pine away, like Bruce had predicted, but I wasn't going to tell them that, for fear of influencing their decision. After finishing my paragraph, Bucky and Steve both just stared at me, disbelief clear. Angel, you are such an idiot, Bucky finally said, much to my offense. Before I could do anything though, he leaned forward and kissed me. And what a kiss! It was rough and filled with passion as his tongue swiped against my lips for permission to enter, which I gave with a gasp. After a moment's hesitation, I began kissing him back, pouring every ounce of longing and desire I had held for them in the past months. His fingers carted through my hair as he dragged me closer to his warm body, practically placing me in his lap. I returned the favor, running my fingers through his dark brown locks, losing myself to the love and lust that permeated the air. Finally, I had to break away to breathe, gasping for air as Bucky continued to kiss down my neck. My turn. I heard vaguely before I was lifted into Steve's arms and my lips were claimed again. Where Bucky was passionate and assertive, Steve was sweet and loving, his mouth moving against mine in a gentle dance. Bucky came up behind me and Steve released my mouth to give Bucky a lingering kiss over my shoulder. It was probably the hottest thing I had ever seen. I squirmed between the two, not wanting to be left out, and they broke apart to grin down at me. This is how it's going to be from now on, doll. Just the three of us. My eyes widened and I looked between the two of them, who were looking at me with amusement. We didn't want to approach you because we thought you had a soulmate yourself, sweetheart. See, all this could have been avoided if you had just come out and told us, doll. Bucky teased, gently tickling my sides, making me giggle. I grabbed hold of his hand and brought it to my cheek, nuzzling into it. He smiled and softly pushed away some hair away from my face before sobering. Now that we've established that we're soulmates, there's going to be a few changes. I eyed him warily, not sure where he was going with this. He nodded to Steve and he picked me up and placed me so I could see them both again. Angel, we want you to move in with us. My jaw dropped. I thought they would be hesitant to do something big like that, considering their 1940s ideals. Not just for all of us, but for you. It's not good for you to stay holed up in your room. You're wasting away in Bucky and I can't and won't let you do that. If you move in with us, we can help take care of you and get you through this with as little pain as possible. We know what it's like to suffer from PTSD, trust me, we know. And trust us when we say it's easier to get through when you have your soulmate by your side. Bucky nodded in agreement to Steve's words, kissing his cheek. I noticed that they were being more outward in their physical affection in my presence now, as if they were no longer trying to hide their more intimate moments. It made my heart swell with joy at the thought that they were actually including me in those moments. We also want you to communicate with someone about what you're going through. Even if it's just me or Steve, but I think Sam would be able to help you a lot since he runs a support group for people with PTSD. I looked down in shame, thinking how weak I was that I was suffering the same things that those that had been on active duty suffered. Hey, none of that. I can see what you're thinking and what you went through is definitely reason enough to be suffering. Buck's right. You went through a traumatic experience. We don't judge you based on how bad the experience was. There's no scale. You went through it and are struggling, period. That's it. There's no reason to be ashamed. Like we said, both Bucky and I have suffered from the effects of PTSD too. Does that make us weak? I shook my head vehemently. Steve smiled. Then it doesn't make you weak either. I bit back tears at his kind words and I gave them a watery smile, trying to convey my thanks without words. I went ahead and signed, "Thank you," to them, hoping they would understand at least that. They did. "You're welcome," they chorused, making me huff out a laugh. "Come on. Bucky can pick some of your clothes out, but I'm going to carry you up to our floor. First things first, you need a good night's sleep. And I can tell by the bags under your eyes you haven't been." GE grabbed my pencil and pad of paper as Steve lifted me up out of my bed as if I weighed nothing. I suppose, to him, I did. He frowned down at my slight, bony form. "And you need to eat more. You're skin and bone. That won't be a problem with your cooking, punk. Angel will be happy and healthy before we know it." Bucky piped up from my closet, poking his head out to give me a wink. I blushed, thinking that he would also be going through my undergarments, but considering he was my soulmate, I guess I didn't really mind that much. Steve smirked and began moving me towards my front door and the elevator. When he pushed open the door, we were greeted by the rest of the Avengers and company, caught red-handed eavesdropping. Most of them at least had the decency to look a bit sheepish, but Darcy and Tony were grinning from ear to ear when they saw me in Steve's arms. I blushed beet red and hid my face in his shoulder, feeling his chest rumble from his silent laughter. "Finally, I thought you guys were going to dance around each other forever. It was getting tedious," Tony exclaimed. a shit-eating grin plastered on his face. Darcy nodded enthusiastically in agreement, apparently having been filled in by the others on the situation. I glanced cautiously at Clint and Natasha, worried about their reaction to my state, and cringed when I saw their thunderous expressions. "If you don't let Steve and Bucky take care of you, we will. And trust me, you don't want Clint and I to kick your ass into gear," Natasha stated clearly, her tone warning. I gulped. I knew she was serious. She then gave me a small smile. "That being said, I'm glad you finally got your head out of your ass and are together now. You're all good for each other. You do realize I'm going to have to give you and Barnes the dad talk, right Rogers?" Clint eyed us with mock suspicion. As if he didn't trust his own teammate, Steve laughed. "Looking forward to that, Clint. Hope there will be snacks," he teased, causing me to laugh lightly. "Now if you'll all excuse us, Angel here needs a good night's sleep." "And sleeping is all you'll be doing, correct?" Clint questioned, raising a brow. I raised mine as well, glancing towards myself and then back at him. He deflated a little. "Okay, yeah. You're too tired to do anything I need to be worried about. But if I even think you're doing something to my little girl, Rogers, then I'll be dropping through the air vents to shoot your ass. Lighten up, Barton. You should be grateful our girl has such good protectors on her side," Bucky said as he came sauntering into the hallway, a bag of my things thrown over his shoulder. With that, Bucky began herding Steve, and thus me, towards the elevator. "Wait," I heard, and Steve turned around for me to see Darcy racing back down the hallway. "I need to speak with Angel alone." "So, let her go, Cap," Darcy demanded, and I blushed once again, knowing that I was too weak to stand on my own. "You're just going to have to deal with us, Darcy. Angel's too tired to even stand." "Make this quick," Bucky grumbled, arms crossed in irritation. "Seriously? Damn it, Angel, if they weren't taking care of you I would kick your ass?" At Steve and Bucky's warning growls she changed topics quickly. "I just wanted to let you know I am expecting a full report on if these two are as hot in bed as they look. That is all." She walked away as I laughed at Bucky and Steve's dumbfounded expressions and slight blushes. At least I wasn't the only one turning red this time. As we got into the elevator to make our way up to their suite, Steve looked down at me, a note of worry in his eyes. "She was kidding, right, Angel?" I merely grinned. I stared at my suitcase in foreboding. It had been a month since Bucky and Steve had begun taking care of me. Under their tender, loving care, I had regained my health and had gotten through some of the issues that had plagued me relentlessly when I had been alone. I had never been happier than when I was in the arms of my soulmates. But now, the summer was coming to an end, and I had a choice to make. I could stay in the Avengers Tower with my soulmates, or I could go home. Go back to my normal life, outside the superheroes and the villains. While everyone assumed I would be staying with my mates, I was hesitant for several reasons. For one, I was missing a bit of normalcy. Not that I didn't love my insane Avengers family, but it was also stressful. Every time I went out I had to deal with the stares and whispers. I knew what everyone thought of me. They thought I was just some fangirl that the Avengers were humoring. That I wasn't there for a reason, let alone that I was with two of the members. Even when I went out with Steve and Bucky, all I heard were scoffs of how I was just lucky they would even look my way. I had tried to ignore these cutting remarks at first, but they had worn me down. Though they were just words and opinions of people I would never know, they hurt. Being back at home, I could work at the shelter again and everything would be like clockwork. A little boring maybe, but at least I had a purpose there. Here everything was paid for by Tony, and I was starting to feel like a freeloader. Not that Tony minded, of course, but I hated the feeling of being useless. I was going a bit stir-crazy with the need to be able to go out and do something. It was just hard to get a job in a big city like this when you had even the slight disability of muteness. I was stumped as to what I should do. My heart was screaming at me that I had just gotten my soulmates, but my head was saying I needed some space to go out and be me. Both were right. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" I started slightly as Steve silently snaked his arms around my waist, nuzzling his face into my hair. I leaned back into his chest with a sigh. Knowing the blow-up was going to be coming, I braced myself while writing. "I'm thinking about going home." Just as I predicted, he jerked slightly in surprise before whirling me around to face him. "What? Please tell me you're joking, Angel." At my serious expression he cursed quietly, his grip tightening on me as if afraid I would disappear right then and there. "No," I frowned at him, irritation pricking me at his tone. "You can't order me to do anything." "What's he trying to order you to do, doll?" "Do I need to teach him some manners?" Bucky joked as he walked in and caught my note, toweling off his hair after his shower. Sensing the tense atmosphere, he immediately sobered. "What's going on?" "Angel wants to leave us," Steve whispered, in a voice so shattered that my heart broke a little. "What? Why, doll, have we done something wrong?" Bucky was immediately at my side, cupping my face in his hands. "No, you two are the best soulmates a girl could ask for. As cliché as it sounds, it is really me, not you. Explain, Angel. We need a little more than that if you're expecting us to just let you walk out of our life without a fight," Bucky said. I sighed. "I'm going stir-crazy here. I know Tony would be happy to take care of me forever, but I miss having a job, and it's hard to get one as a mute. And, as much as I love him, I don't want to work for Tony. I just miss being able to do normal people things, you know? I can't really do that when I'm cooped up here in the tower." Steve looked surprised. "Angel, if you would have told us, we would have helped you find a job. Buck and I need you here. We would miss you too much if you left." Steve gave me a lingering kiss, making my knees feel weak with the emotion he poured into it. I nipped at his lip and he groaned quietly, running his fingers up and down my arms. Bucky swiped the pad of paper and pen from me and tossed it to the ground before lifting me up and tossing me gently on the bed. "I know a way we can convince you to stay," he growled, and I gasped as he climbed over me, claiming my lips with his own in a fierce kiss. While we had become more and more explorative in our affections, we hadn't gotten intimate yet. But I was far from unwilling as Bucky trailed his fingers under my shirt, his cool metal arm and warm human one providing delicious contrast. His hands went further and further up my shirt until he reached my breasts. "I am really sorry. I tried. I did. But I just didn't feel comfortable writing so much smut. So just let your imagination run wild. Again, I apologize if this was what you were looking for, but this just isn't that kind of story apparently." I lay, naked, in Steve and Bucky's arms a couple hours later, completely sated. The two of them sandwiched me between them and they radiated heat, keeping me warm. "So, did we convince you, doll?" I felt Bucky's voice rumble through me and I giggled, burying my face in his chest. "Here, I'll grab the paper," I heard Steve mutter as he got out of bed, quickly returning. I smiled up at him and he gave me a kiss, short and sweet. I grabbed the pen. "I still want a job. I can't keep living in the tower with nothing to do but have amazing sex with the best soulmates ever." The super soldiers chuckled at my words. "We can help you find one, sweetheart. There's even an animal shelter nearby. I remember you saying that's where you worked before." I nodded, smiling. Of course Steve would remember such an inconsequential detail such as that. "We'll go job surfing tomorrow. That is, if you're staying. You're staying, right, Angel?" I heard the worry worm its way into Bucky's voice and I hated myself for placing it there. But I could have some fun with this. After a few moments of tense silence where I let them squirm, I smiled. "I don't know. Maybe one more round of convincing is in order." I laughed as they both sent me wicked grins. "I think we can manage that. As long as it keep you by our side, doll. We'll convince you whenever you want. Just stay with us, alright?" I heard Steve whisper into my ear, causing me to shiver. I nodded, giving him a happy kiss. "I'm not going anywhere." "Good. Because there's something Buck and I have been meaning to tell you." "What's that?" With careful, slow movements, both Bucky and Steve began to sign. "We love you, Angel."